The room laughs. The janitor lowers his eyes in silence. But when the CEO flashes that luxury watch, he has no idea he's mocking the very man who created it. This isn't just another insult. It's the spark that awakens a buried truth, a forgotten legacy hidden for decades. Because this janitor isn't who they think he is. He's the mind behind the empire, the hands that built the watch, and the man who walked away when tragedy struck. But now, the truth is crawling back into the light. Lies, betrayal, and a past the CEO thought was buried forever. When the world finds out who really invented the brand, will justice finally be served, or will power, greed, and corruption bury him all over again? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The marble floors of Harlow Luxury Watches headquarters gleamed under the afternoon sun. Daniel Price pushed his cleaning cart quietly through the busy lobby, doing his best to stay invisible as executives in tailored suits hurried past. The cart's worn wheels squeaked softly against the polished surface, a small sound that seemed to echo his own feeling of being out of place in this world of wealth and power. He kept his head down, methodically wiping fingerprints from the glass display cases that housed timepieces worth more than he made in a year. Each watch sat on velvet cushions under perfect lighting, their gold and platinum faces winking at him like stars he could never reach. The lobby buzzed with activity as employees gathered for what looked like an impromptu meeting. Daniel tried to make himself even less noticeable, but Victor Harlow's booming voice filled the space, impossible to ignore. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor announced, his custom Italian shoes clicking against the marble as he walked. "I wanted to share something special with you all today." Daniel's shoulders tensed. He'd learned to recognize that tone in Victor's voice, the one that usually preceded some display of superiority. Still, he kept working, moving his cloth in slow circles across the glass. "This," Victor continued, holding up his wrist, "is our newest masterpiece, the Harlow Celestial Limited Edition, only 50 pieces worldwide." His voice dripped with pride as he gestured to the watch that caught the light like a small sun. "The culmination of everything our brand represents: excellence, exclusivity, and innovation." The assembled employees murmured appreciatively, exactly as Victor expected them to. Daniel couldn't help but glance up, and his heart caught in his throat. The watch's design was hauntingly familiar. The curved lugs, the unique moon phase display, the distinctive way the numerals wrapped around the dial. It was like seeing a ghost of his own dreams, transformed into something both beautiful and painful to look at. Victor's sharp eyes caught Daniel's gaze. A smirk twisted his lips as he stepped closer, his expensive cologne filling the air between them. "Admiring the craftsmanship, janitor?" The word janitor carried the weight of judgment, making Daniel feel small in his gray uniform. "It's very beautiful, sir," Daniel managed, his voice quiet but steady. He tried to turn back to his work, but Victor wasn't finished. "You know how much this retails for?" Victor didn't wait for an answer. $250,000. He paused for effect, watching Daniel's face. "You could never afford this watch." He lifted his wrist higher, making sure everyone could see both the timepiece and Daniel's discomfort. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not cruel exactly, but the kind of laughter that comes from people eager to stay on their boss's good side. It stung all the same. Daniel's cheeks burned, but years of practice helped him maintain his composure. He nodded politely, his fingers tightening around the cleaning cloth. "You're right, Mr. Harlow, I couldn't." The words tasted bitter in his mouth, but he forced a small smile. "Of course I'm right," Victor chuckled, adjusting his silk tie. "This is what separates the dreamers from the achievers, everyone. Remember that." He turned away, dismissing Daniel as easily as swatting away a fly. The crowd dispersed, leaving Daniel alone with his cart and his thoughts. He continued his cleaning routine, moving through the lobby mechanically while his mind whirled with memories he usually kept locked away. His hands trembled slightly as he collected his supplies, and he knew he needed a moment alone. The janitor's closet on the ground floor had become his sanctuary over the years. It wasn't much, just a narrow room with metal shelves stacked with cleaning supplies, a folding chair wedged in the corner, and a single buzzing fluorescent light overhead. But it was private. And right now, that's what Daniel needed most. He closed the door behind him and sank into the chair, his body suddenly heavy with the weight of years of silence. The familiar scent of pine cleaner and old mop heads surrounded him as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather notebook. The binding was cracked, the pages yellow with age, but he handled it with reverence. His fingers traced the date written in careful script on the first page, 25 years ago. He began turning the pages slowly, each one filled with detailed sketches and technical notes in his precise handwriting. There it was, on page 37. The original design that had sparked his dreams so long ago. His vision for a watch that would combine classic elegance with innovative complications. The curved lugs were there, just as he'd imagined them. The moon phase display that had taken him weeks to perfect. The distinctive number placement that Victor now claimed as his own brilliant innovation. Daniel's vision blurred as he studied his old drawings. He could still feel the excitement of those late nights spent at his drafting table, the joy of solving each technical challenge, the pride when he'd finally completed the prototype. His wife had believed in him so completely, had encouraged him even when success seemed impossible. The pages grew less steady in his hands as he remembered her face, how she'd light up when he shared his latest breakthrough. How she'd still believed in him even when the medical bills started piling up, when the choice between his dreams and her care became no choice at all. A drop of moisture fell onto the page, and Daniel quickly wiped it away before it could smear the ink. He hadn't cried over this in years, but Victor's smug display had torn open old wounds. The watch on Victor's wrist wasn't just a luxury timepiece, it was the physical manifestation of everything Daniel had lost, everything he'd given up, transformed into a symbol of another man's success. The fluorescent light flickered overhead as Daniel sat in his little sanctuary, surrounded by mops and buckets, holding the dreams of his younger self in his hands. The contrast between what could have been and what was felt sharp enough to cut. But even in this moment of humiliation and remembrance, Daniel maintained his dignity. He sat straight in his folding chair, his uniform worn but clean, his hands steady as they held the notebook. Because while Victor might own the watch on his wrist, he could never own the spirit of innovation and love that had first brought it to life. Daniel checked his own watch, a simple timepiece that kept perfect time despite its modest appearance. His break was almost over. Soon he would need to return to his duties, to the floors that needed mopping and the trash that needed collecting. But for now, he allowed himself these few precious moments with his memories, his sketches, and the quiet strength that had carried him through all these years. The small janitor's closet felt even more cramped as Daniel Price sat hunched over his old notebook, his weathered fingers tracing the precise technical drawings that filled its pages. The harsh fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting sharp shadows across the detailed sketches of watch mechanisms he had created so many years ago. Victor Harlow's mocking words still rang in his ears. "You could never afford this watch." The truth was, Daniel had designed something even better 2 decades earlier. Every gear, every intricate component sketched in this notebook represented countless hours of innovation and dedication. Daniel leaned back in the metal folding chair, his mind drifting to his younger days. He had been a rising star at Mitchell, Sons Timepieces, fresh out of engineering school with a head full of revolutionary ideas. His designs had caught the attention of industry veterans, particularly his breakthrough concept for a self-winding mechanism that was both more efficient and more reliable than anything on the market. "Look at these drawings now," Daniel muttered to himself, running his palm across a yellowed page. The ink had faded somewhat, but the precision of his work remained clear. He could still remember the excitement of those early days, working late into the night at his drafting table, Sarah bringing him cups of coffee and sharing his enthusiasm for each new breakthrough. Sarah. His chest tightened at the thought of his late wife. She had been his biggest supporter, his partner in every sense of the word. When she first got sick, Daniel had been on the verge of finalizing the prototype that would have changed everything. The original version of the very watch Victor Harlow now flaunted so arrogantly. The memories washed over him. The doctor's grave expression, the mounting medical bills, the impossible choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Sarah needed specialized treatment, and their insurance wouldn't cover everything. His salary as an engineer, while comfortable, wasn't enough. They needed more. "Mr. Mitchell," Daniel whispered, remembering that final conversation with his old boss, "I have to resign. My wife needs me." The understanding in the older man's eyes had made it both easier and harder. Mitchell, Sons had offered to keep his position open, but as Sarah's condition worsened, Daniel knew he needed something with flexible hours and steady work, even if it paid far less. He had found janitorial work at a hospital first, allowing him to be near Sarah during her treatments. The job wasn't prestigious, but it gave him what he needed most: time with his wife and a way to pay the bills. After she passed, he just never went back. The world of engineering and innovation seemed to belong to a different life, a different Daniel Price. Standing up from the cramped chair, Daniel tucked the notebook back into his worn leather messenger bag. His shift was over, and his small apartment waited. The evening commute passed in a blur of subway cars and familiar streets, his mind still trapped between past and present. Inside his modest one-bedroom apartment, Daniel set his bag down by the door and walked to the bedroom. The space was clean and simple, with just a few photographs on the walls, mostly of him and Sarah in happier times. He knelt beside the bed and pulled out an old shoebox from underneath, handling it with gentle reverence. The box contained all of Sarah's letters, carefully preserved. Some were from their courtship, others from times they were apart during her hospital stays. Daniel's fingers found the one he was looking for, almost by instinct. The paper was thin, the creases well worn from countless readings. Settling onto his bed, he unfolded the letter. Sarah's handwriting flowed across the page, still strong, despite her illness when she wrote it. "My dearest Daniel, the nurses tell me you've been working double shifts again. I know why you do it. For me, always for me. But please remember who you are. I see how you light up when you talk about your designs, how your eyes shine when you explain some clever new mechanism you've thought up. Don't let your gifts be buried in dust, my love. The world needs people who can create beautiful things, who can turn dreams into reality. Whether you're designing watches or sweeping floors, you bring the same dedication and care to everything you do. That's one of the countless reasons I love you. But promise me something? Promise you won't lock away that brilliant mind of yours forever. Your creativity is a gift, Daniel. Sometimes we have to set our gifts aside for a while, but that doesn't mean we should forget them. All my love, Sarah." Daniel set the letter carefully on his nightstand, feeling the weight of Victor Harlow's earlier mockery press down on him anew. The contrast between Sarah's loving encouragement and Harlow's casual cruelty created a strange ache in his chest. He glanced at the letter again, Sarah's words seeming to glow in the dim evening light. "Don't let your gifts be buried in dust." The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, decades later, literally cleaning up dust for a living. His hands, once used to craft precise engineering drawings and delicate watch mechanisms, now pushed mops and wielded cleaning supplies. The letter lay on the nightstand, its message both comforting and unsettling. Sarah had always seen the best in him, had always believed his talents would find their way back into the light. But sitting in his quiet apartment, with the memory of that morning's humiliation still fresh, Daniel couldn't help but wonder if he had let her down by burying those gifts so deeply that even he sometimes forgot they existed. The next morning, Daniel's mop moved across the marble floor in slow, methodical strokes. His shoulders felt heavier than usual, weighed down by yesterday's humiliation. The early morning sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows of Harlow Luxury's lobby, catching on the polished surfaces he'd spent hours perfecting. "Good morning, Daniel." Elena's warm voice cut through his gloomy thoughts. The young receptionist stood by her desk, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. "I brought you your usual black with just a touch of sugar." Daniel straightened up, touched by her thoughtfulness. "That's very kind of you, Elena. Thank you." "You seem down today," she said, handing him the cup. Her dark eyes studied his face with genuine concern. More than usual, I mean. Is everything okay? Daniel's fingers wrapped around the warm cup, but he couldn't meet her gaze. I'm fine, he mumbled, though the words felt hollow even to him. Elena wasn't so easily deterred. She glanced around the empty lobby and pulled up 2 chairs from the waiting area. Take a break with me? Just for 5 minutes? Something in her gentle persistence made it hard to refuse. Daniel carefully set his mop aside and sat down, his work-worn hands cradling the coffee cup. Is this about yesterday? Elena asked softly. What Mr. Harlow said about the watch. Daniel's shoulders tensed. You saw that? Everyone did, she said, anger flickering across her usually cheerful face. He had no right to treat you that way. It's nothing new, Daniel said, trying to shrug it off. But the memory of Victor's smug smile made his chest tighten. Just another day at Harlow Luxury. No, Elena insisted, leaning forward. Something about this really hurt you. I can tell. Daniel took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through him. Elena waited patiently, her presence somehow making it safe to speak. That watch he was showing off? Daniel began, his voice barely above a whisper. The Heritage Collection timepiece? Elena nodded. The company's flagship design. Mr. Harlow never stops bragging about how it put Harlow Luxury on the map 20 years ago. Daniel's fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup. I designed it. Elena's eyes widened. What? The original prototype, at least, Daniel continued, something loosening in his chest as he spoke. Back when I was an engineer, fresh out of college, I spent 3 years perfecting every detail. You're an engineer? Elena set her coffee down, giving him her full attention. Daniel nodded, memories flooding back. I specialized in precision mechanics, with a focus on timepieces. That watch, it wasn't just about luxury. I wanted to create something that combined beauty with incredible accuracy, something that would last generations. But how did it become Harlow's design? I never got to see it through to production, Daniel explained, his voice growing stronger as Elena listened intently. My wife Sarah got sick. The medical bills. They were overwhelming. I had to choose between pursuing the patent process or being there for her. It wasn't really a choice at all. Elena's eyes softened with understanding. You chose love over ambition. Sarah was everything to me, Daniel said simply. By the time he paused, swallowing hard. By the time she passed away, someone else had developed a similar design. Harlow Luxury bought it, refined it, and turned it into their signature piece. But it was your creation first, Elena said firmly. Daniel pulled out his worn leather wallet and carefully extracted a folded piece of paper. He smoothed it out, revealing a detailed technical drawing of a watch mechanism. The yellowed paper was covered in precise measurements and notes in his neat handwriting. Elena studied the sketch, her eyes growing wide. This is incredible, Daniel. The attention to detail. It's exactly like the Heritage Collection only. Only better, Daniel finished quietly. The original design had a few features they never implemented, like this shock absorption system here. He pointed to a particular section of the drawing. It would have made the watch more durable without compromising its elegance. Why haven't you ever told anyone? Daniel tucked the drawing away carefully. Who would believe a janitor? Besides, it was so long ago. I made my choice, and I don't regret putting Sarah first. But that doesn't make it right that they're profiting from your work, Elena protested. Your talent, your vision. It deserves recognition. Daniel shook his head. I'm not looking for recognition, He paused, struggling to find the words. Sometimes when I'm cleaning the display cases, and I see those watches gleaming under the lights, I remember who I used to be, who I wanted to become. You're still that person, Daniel, Elena said firmly. That brilliance, that creativity, it didn't go away just because life took you down a different path. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a flutter of pride in his chest. Elena's unwavering belief in him stirred something he thought he'd lost long ago. Maybe you're right, he admitted, standing up and retrieving his mop. Thank you for listening, Elena. It's been nice to finally tell someone. Thank you for trusting me with your story, she replied, getting up to return to her desk. And Daniel, that spark of genius I see in these drawings? It's still there in everything you do, even in how perfectly you polish these floors. As Daniel resumed his work, his movements were lighter, more purposeful. Elena's words echoed in his mind, and for the first time in years, he felt a small flame of pride flickering in his heart. The watch designs in his old notebook weren't just relics of an abandoned dream, they were proof of what he was capable of, what he had achieved. Even if no one else knew the truth, sharing his secret with Elena had awakened something in him, a tiny spark of his old confidence beginning to glow once more. The next morning, Daniel's mop moved across the marble floor in slow, methodical strokes. His shoulders felt heavier than usual, weighed down by yesterday's humiliation. The early morning sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows of Harlow Luxury's lobby, catching on the polished surfaces he'd spent hours perfecting. "Good morning, Daniel." Elena's warm voice cut through his gloomy thoughts. The young receptionist stood by her desk, 2 steaming cups of coffee in her hands. "I brought you your favorite black with just a touch of sugar." "You didn't have to do that, Elena," Daniel said softly, but gratitude warmed his tired eyes as he accepted the cup. A young man in a navy blazer sat in one of the leather chairs nearby, his leg bouncing with nervous energy as he checked his watch. He couldn't have been more than 30, with carefully styled dark hair and a messenger bag stuffed with notebooks at his feet. "That's Caleb Rivers," Elena whispered to Daniel. "He's here for an interview with marketing about the new watch launch. Been waiting almost an hour now." Daniel nodded and returned to his work, but he could feel Caleb's frustrated sighs from across the lobby. After another 20 minutes passed, the young man stood up and approached Elena's desk. "I'm sorry, but is there any update?" "I have other appointments today," Caleb asked, his voice tired but professional. Elena checked her computer and frowned. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Rivers. It looks like they're still stuck in another meeting. Would you like me to reschedule?" Caleb's shoulders slumped. "No, that's all right. I'll wait a bit longer." He turned and nearly collided with Daniel's mop bucket. "Oh, I'm sorry about that." "No harm done," Daniel said, steadying the bucket. Caleb glanced at Daniel's careful movements as he cleaned. "You take real pride in your work, don't you? I've been watching you for the past hour. There's something almost artistic about how you move that mop." Daniel paused, surprised by the observation. "Everything deserves care and attention to detail, even if it's just cleaning floors." "That's an interesting perspective." Caleb settled against Elena's desk. "Most people wouldn't see it that way." "Daniel understands craftsmanship better than anyone," Elena chimed in, giving Daniel an encouraging smile. Daniel shot her a warning look, but Caleb's journalist instincts had already picked up on something interesting. "Oh? How so?" "It's nothing," Daniel mumbled, but Elena wasn't letting it go. Daniel's being modest. "He used to design watches, didn't you, Daniel?" Caleb's eyebrows shot up. "Watches? Like the ones Harlow makes?" Daniel's hands tightened on the mop handle. He wasn't used to attention, and the memory of Victor's mockery was still fresh. But something in Caleb's genuine curiosity made him continue. "It was a long time ago," he said quietly, "before Harlow Luxury became what it is today." "Would you tell me more?" Caleb asked, pulling out a small notebook. "I'm fascinated by craftsmanship, especially watches. That's why I'm here to cover the new launch." Daniel hesitated, but Elena gave him another encouraging nod. He leaned his mop against the wall and pulled out his ancient leather wallet. From inside, he carefully extracted a folded piece of paper, a technical drawing, yellowed with age but still precise in its detail. "This was one of my early designs," he explained, smoothing the paper carefully. "See how the mechanism allows for a smoother transition between functions?" Caleb leaned in, his eyes widening. "This is incredible work. The detail is amazing." He studied the drawing more closely. "Wait a minute. This looks like the basis for their heritage collection, the one that put Harlow on the map." Daniel quickly folded the drawing and tucked it away. "Like I said, it was a long time ago." "But these are your designs?" Caleb pressed gently. "You created these?" "I was young," Daniel said, picking up his mop again. "Had big dreams about making beautiful things that would last generations. But life had other plans." "What happened?" Daniel's movements slowed. "My wife got sick. She needed care, and my salary as a junior designer wasn't enough for the medical bills. I had to make a choice. So you left the industry? Some things are more important than success, Daniel said simply. I don't regret it. Caleb was scribbling rapidly in his notebook now. But your designs, they're clearly the foundation of what Harlow Luxury became. Don't you want recognition for that? Daniel shook his head. I just wanted to make something beautiful and meaningful, something that would remind people that every moment is precious. His voice grew softer. That's what my wife taught me. Daniel, Caleb said seriously, your story deserves to be told. Would you be willing to talk more about this? Maybe over coffee sometime? Before Daniel could respond, the elevator dinged. A group of executives in expensive suits emerged, their voices loud and confident. Daniel quickly returned to his mopping, becoming invisible again as they passed. Caleb watched this transformation with sharp eyes. He pulled out a business card and handed it to Elena. Could you make sure Daniel gets this? I'd really like to continue our conversation. Elena took the card, nodding firmly. I'll make sure he gets it. As the marketing team apologized for keeping him waiting, Caleb opened his notebook one more time. Under the day's date, he wrote clearly, Daniel Price, the janitor who invented the watch. The elevator doors closed behind Caleb and the executives, leaving Daniel alone with Elena in the lobby. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, catching on the marble floors that Daniel had polished to perfection. The same careful attention to detail he had once given to his watches now applied to a different kind of craft. Daniel hurried home after his shift, his conversation with the young journalist Caleb still echoing in his mind. Something had stirred inside him, a mix of long-buried pride and rising indignation. He climbed the creaky stairs to his third-floor apartment, his legs aching from a day of cleaning floors, but his mind was racing faster than it had in years. The apartment was small but tidy, with worn furniture that spoke of careful maintenance rather than neglect. Afternoon sunlight filtered through thin curtains, casting long shadows across the faded carpet. Daniel didn't even stop to change out of his work uniform. Instead, he headed straight for his bedroom closet, where a dusty cardboard box sat on the highest shelf. It has to be here somewhere, he muttered, stretching to reach the box. His fingers brushed against its edge, and he carefully brought it down. The box was labeled simply, Margaret's Things, in his neat handwriting, though the marker had faded over the years. Daniel sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, taking a deep breath before opening the box. The familiar scent of old paper and his wife's lavender sachets wafted up, making his heart catch. On top lay Margaret's reading glasses, still in their case. He gently set these aside. Underneath, he found what he was looking for, a thick manila envelope, its corners worn soft with age. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were his original patent papers for the watch face design, filed 23 years ago. The technical drawings were still crisp and precise, showing the innovative mechanism he'd created that made the watch so special. There you are, he whispered, spreading the papers across the floor. The official patent office seal was clearly visible, along with his name, Daniel Price, primary inventor. He remembered the day he'd filed these papers, how Margaret had taken him out to celebrate at their favorite diner, even though money was tight. Digging deeper into the box, Daniel pulled out an old photo album. He flipped it open, and there she was, Margaret, beautiful and young, her dark hair falling in waves around her face. She was holding up her wrist to show off the prototype watch he'd made especially for her. The silver case caught the light, and even in the old photograph, you could see the pride in her eyes. You always believed in me, didn't you? Daniel touched the photograph gently. The watch in the picture was his original design, the very same one that Victor Harlow's company now mass-produced and sold for thousands of dollars. More memories surfaced as he continued looking through the box. There were his original sketches on graph paper, some on napkins from late nights at the diner where he and Margaret would sit for hours while he worked out the details. His neat technical notes filled the margins. Gear ratios, materials, specifications, precise measurements down to the millimeter. He found his old notebook, its pages yellow with age but still intact. Inside were more detailed drawings of the watch components, along with his handwritten notes about various improvements and modifications. One page showed the unique winding mechanism that had made his design so revolutionary, the same mechanism that was now a signature feature of Harlow's luxury watches. A stack of photographs showed the progression of his work. There was the first rough prototype, mostly held together with hope and determination. Then came the refined versions, each one better than the last. The final prototype, the one Margaret wore in the photo, was beautiful in its simplicity and elegance. Daniel's throat tightened as he found a small velvet pouch at the bottom of the box. Inside was Margaret's actual prototype watch, the one he'd made for her. He'd kept it working perfectly all through her illness, even when they had to sell everything else to pay for treatments. After she passed, he couldn't bear to look at it anymore and had packed it away with her other things. The watch still ticked steadily, its sound as familiar as a heartbeat. He turned it over to see the inscription he'd had engraved on the back. To Margaret, time is precious, but not as precious as you. Love, Daniel. Among the papers, he found letters from manufacturing companies who had been interested in his design back then. They proved he'd been in negotiations to produce the watch before Margaret got sick. There were even preliminary contracts, never signed because he'd had to choose between his career and caring for his wife. Daniel gathered everything together: the patent papers, the photographs, the prototype, the sketches, and the business correspondence. He laid them out on his small kitchen table alongside Margaret's letters. The evidence was undeniable. The watch that Victor Harlow bragged about, the one he claimed as his company's crown jewel, had begun right here, in Daniel's own hands. The last rays of sunset painted the room in shades of gold as Daniel stood looking at the items spread across his table. Each piece told part of the story, his story, Margaret's story, the truth about the watch that had made Victor Harlow rich while its actual inventor mopped floors. Margaret's last letter lay open among the evidence. Her handwriting, though shaky from illness, remained determined. Never let your gifts be buried in dust, my love. The world needs what you can create. Daniel placed his hands flat on the table, looking from the patent papers to his wife's words and back again. The choice before him felt monumental: remain in the shadows with his truth, or step into the light with it. 20 years of silence weighed against the possibility of finally being heard. His eyes lingered on the prototype watch, still keeping perfect time after all these years. Just like the truth, it had waited patiently to be brought back into the light. He carefully arranged the watch sketches beside Margaret's letters, the past and present meeting on his humble kitchen table while he stood between them, contemplating his next move. The room grew darker as evening settled in, but Daniel remained standing there, his hands resting on the evidence of his life's work, trying to decide whether to let the truth remain hidden or finally give it voice. The kettle whistled sharply in Daniel's small kitchen, pulling him from his thoughts. He poured the steaming water over a simple tea bag, watching the amber liquid swirl in his favorite chipped mug, a gift from his late wife Maria. The familiar scent of chamomile filled his modest apartment as he carried the tea to his living room, where cardboard boxes lay scattered across the floor. His hands trembled slightly as he settled onto his worn armchair, surrounded by the remnants of his past life. The evening news droned quietly in the background, but Daniel barely noticed until a familiar name caught his attention. In business news, luxury watchmaker Harlow Timepieces faces legal challenges as an anonymous claimant disputes ownership of their flagship design. Daniel's tea sloshed in his cup. He scrambled for the remote and turned up the volume, leaning forward intently. The lawsuit claims the original design was misappropriated in the company's early days. His heart pounded as he set down his mug and pulled the nearest box closer. Inside, beneath yellowed newspapers and old photographs, lay a leather portfolio he hadn't touched in years. The leather was cracked with age, but the contents inside remained pristine, protected by plastic sleeves. Daniel's fingers traced the detailed sketches he'd drawn decades ago. Every curve, every gear, every innovative detail of the watch that now adorned Victor Harlow's wrist was there on these pages. His eyes stung as he remembered the countless nights he'd spent perfecting these designs, Maria bringing him coffee and encouraging him to keep going when he felt like giving up. The phone rang, startling him. Elena's name flashed on the caller ID. Daniel? Have you seen the news? Her voice crackled with excitement. I'm looking at my old designs right now, he said quietly. Elena, they're talking about my work. Someone else must have found out. This is your chance, Elena said firmly. You have to come forward. You have the proof, don't you? Daniel pulled out the patent papers, his name clearly visible at the top. Yes, but... He trailed off, his throat tight. But what? Daniel, I've watched you scrub floors for 3 years while that man parades around in suits bought with your ideas. It isn't right. It's more complicated than that, Daniel sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. I walked away, Elena. I chose to leave it all behind when Maria got sick. That doesn't mean they had the right to steal your work. Elena's voice softened. Maria wouldn't want you to let them get away with this. You told me yourself what she wrote in her letters, about not burying your gifts. Daniel's eyes drifted to Maria's letter on the nightstand. The paper had grown thin from countless readings, but her words remained clear. Your talents were given to you for a reason, my love. Don't let them be buried in dust. I'm just a janitor now, he whispered, voicing the fear that had been growing in his chest. Who would believe me? I believed you, Elena said firmly. That journalist today, Caleb, he seemed interested too. And you have proof, real proof. The truth deserves to be told, Daniel. He stood and paced his small living room, patent papers in hand. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical thing. Coming forward would mean facing Victor Harlow's wealth and power. It would mean stepping out of the shadows he'd hidden in for so long. The thought made his stomach churn. What if I lose my job? He asked. I'm not young anymore, Elena. I can't afford to. And what if you succeed? Elena interrupted. What if you finally get recognition for your work? Think about what that would mean. Daniel stopped in front of the window, looking out at the city lights. In the reflection of the glass, he could almost see his younger self, the eager engineer, with dreams of revolutionizing the watch industry. That man hadn't been afraid to take risks. I need time to think, he said finally. This isn't just about me. If I do this, it could affect everyone at the company. Of course, Elena's voice was gentle now. Take the night to think it over. But Daniel? Yes? Remember what you told me about the watches you designed? How you wanted to create something beautiful that would last, something that would matter? Daniel's hand tightened around the patent paper. I remember. Well, the truth matters too. Sleep on it, but don't let fear make this decision for you. After saying good night, Daniel carefully folded the patent paper and slipped it into his pocket. He would take it with him tomorrow, just in case. But tonight, he needed to think, to weigh the costs of speaking up against the price of staying silent. He picked up Maria's letter again, her familiar handwriting blurring slightly as his eyes welled up. The truth did matter, she had taught him that, but so did survival. And he'd learned that lesson the hard way too. The patent paper felt heavy in his pocket as he began cleaning up the boxes, putting away the pieces of his past, except for this one crucial document. Tomorrow would bring either a new beginning or another day of quiet resignation. Tonight, he would let his conscience wrestle with the choice. The wooden pews creaked softly as Daniel settled into his usual spot near the back of the small brick church. Morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting warm patches of colored light across the worn carpet. He'd been coming to this same church for 20 years, finding comfort in its familiar hymns and friendly faces. Today, though, the weight of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. The patent papers felt like they were burning a hole in his jacket pocket where he'd tucked them before leaving his apartment. He'd barely slept last night, tossing and turning as he wondered what Maria would have wanted him to do. Pastor Mike stood at the pulpit, his gray hair catching the light. His kind face surveyed the congregation as he opened his worn Bible. Today, we're going to talk about courage, he began, his voice warm and steady. Not the kind of courage that makes headlines or wins medals, but the quiet kind that speaks truth when it would be easier to stay silent. Daniel's hands tightened on the hymnal in his lap. His heart beat a little faster as Pastor Mike continued. In the book of Daniel, we find a story about standing up for what's right, even when it costs us everything, Pastor Mike said, adjusting his reading glasses. Daniel chose to pray openly, knowing it could mean death in the lion's den, But he knew that truth matters to God, and that hiding who we are and what we know isn't what we're called to do. Mrs. Peterson, who sat in the row ahead of Daniel, nodded vigorously, her silver hair bobbing. Daniel had fixed her kitchen sink last month when she couldn't afford a plumber. She always saved him a cookie after church potlucks. Sometimes, Pastor Mike continued, his voice growing softer, more personal, we carry truths that feel too heavy to speak. We think staying quiet is safer, easier. But friends, that weight gets heavier every day we carry it. God calls us to live in the light of truth, not the shadows of fear. Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He blinked them away quickly, but not before Sophie, a young mother who sat beside him, noticed. She reached over and patted his hand gently. After the sermon, as people gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and donuts, Daniel found himself surrounded by familiar faces. Mrs. Peterson pressed a cup of coffee into his hands, fixing him with a knowing look. "Something's troubling you, dear," she said, not as a question but as a gentle observation. "I can see it in your eyes." Daniel stared into his coffee cup, watching the cream swirl. I have to make a decision," he said slowly. "About telling the truth about something that happened a long time ago. Something that could change a lot of people's lives." Sophie joined them, balancing her young daughter on her hip. "Is this about that watch company you used to work for?" she asked. "I remember you mentioning it once during the church maintenance committee meeting." Daniel looked up, surprised she'd remembered. "Yes," he admitted. I designed something important, but someone else took credit for it." "Oh, Daniel," Mrs. Peterson clicked her tongue sympathetically. "That must have been so hard to keep inside all these years." Other church members drifted over, forming a small circle around Daniel. Tom, a retired schoolteacher, spoke up. "You know, I've always admired how you help everyone here without asking for recognition. Fixed my car last winter, wouldn't take a dime. But sometimes, standing up for yourself is just as important as helping others." "That's right," added Rebecca, who ran the church food bank. "Jesus stood up to the money changers in the temple, didn't he? Sometimes speaking truth is an act of service too." Pastor Mike approached the group, his Bible tucked under his arm. He didn't say anything at first, just listened as Daniel slowly shared more details about his situation. The pastor's eyes were kind, but serious when he finally spoke. "Daniel," he said quietly, "God doesn't give us our gifts so we can bury them. He gives them to us to share, to make the world a better place. Sometimes that means standing up and saying, 'This is who I am, and this is what I know to be true.'" Daniel felt something shift inside his chest, like a key turning in a lock. These people had known him for years, seen him fix their leaky faucets, shovel their driveways, repair their cars. They knew his character, his heart, and they believed in him. "We're here for you," Sophie said firmly, bouncing her daughter who was falling asleep against her shoulder. "Whatever you decide." "And we'll be praying," Mrs. Peterson added, squeezing his arm. "You're not alone in this, dear." The conversation gradually shifted to other topics: the upcoming church picnic, the youth group's mission trip, the new hymnal covers the quilting circle was making. But Daniel felt different, steadier somehow, as though the ground beneath his feet had finally stopped shifting. As the afternoon wore on, clouds gathered overhead, and the early evening brought a gentle rain. Daniel stayed late, helping stack chairs and wash coffee cups, finding comfort in the familiar routine. By the time he left, the rain had stopped, and the street lamps were flickering to life, casting pools of golden light on the wet pavement. He paused at the bottom of the church steps, looking up at the old stone building. The cross on top stood dark against the evening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the cool evening air on his face. "Maria," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of dripping rain. "I could really use some of your courage right now. You always knew the right thing to do." He stood there for a moment longer, letting the peace of the evening settle around him like a familiar blanket, before starting his walk home under the glow of the street lamps. The wooden pews creaked softly as Daniel settled into his usual spot near the back of the small brick church. Evening sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting warm patches of colored light across the worn carpet. The choir practice filled the sanctuary with gentle harmonies, their voices rising and falling like waves. Pastor Mike's sermon about courage and truth had struck something deep within Daniel. The words seemed to speak directly to his situation, especially when the pastor said, "Sometimes the hardest truth to tell is the one we've kept buried the longest." After the service ended, Daniel lingered in his pew, watching as other church members slowly filtered out. Mrs. Henderson patted his shoulder as she passed by, and Tom from the men's group gave him an encouraging nod. They all knew something was weighing on him, even if they didn't know exactly what. Just as Daniel was gathering his coat to leave, a familiar face appeared at the end of his pew. It was Caleb Rivers, the young journalist he'd met earlier on the park bench. The younger man wore a kind smile and carried a small notebook in his hand. "Mr. Price," Caleb said warmly, "I hoped I might find you here. Elena mentioned you usually attend evening service." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to see the journalist again so soon. "Good evening, Caleb. What brings you to our little church?" Caleb gestured to the empty space beside Daniel. "May I?" Daniel nodded, and Caleb slipped into the pew. The church was nearly empty now, with only a few volunteers tidying up after the service. The choir's sheet music rustled as they packed away their folders. "Our conversation this afternoon got me thinking," Caleb began, his voice gentle but eager. "The way you talked about watches, the technical details, the history of the craft, that's not common knowledge for." He hesitated. "For a janitor?" Daniel finished with a sad smile. "I did some preliminary research," Caleb continued. 25 years ago, Harlow Luxury launched their flagship timepiece. It revolutionized the industry. But there's surprisingly little information about its development." He opened his notebook. "Just vague references to innovative engineering and breakthrough design." Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket, feeling the folded patent papers there. Pastor Mike's words about truth echoed in his mind. "The lawsuit that's been filed," Caleb said carefully. "It claims the original design was stolen. Mr. Price, was it yours?" The church had grown very quiet. Even the choir had left, leaving only the soft tick of the old wall clock marking time. Daniel could feel his heart pounding in his chest. "I've kept this buried for so long," Daniel said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "My wife Sarah. She always said I shouldn't let my gifts go to waste. But when she got sick..." He pulled out the worn patent papers and unfolded them carefully. Caleb's eyes widened as he examined the detailed technical drawings. The date stamps were clear, the official patent office seals unmistakable. "These are remarkable," he breathed. "The precision, the innovation, it's all here." "I was young, full of ideas," Daniel explained, pointing to specific features in the drawings. "See this escapement mechanism? I designed it to be more efficient, more reliable, and this case design, it protected the movement better than anything else on the market at the time." "What happened?" Caleb asked softly. Daniel's fingers traced the edge of the papers. "Sarah got sick. The medical bills. They were overwhelming. I was working day and night on the prototype, but we needed money right away. I had to choose, my career or my wife." He smiled sadly. "It wasn't really a choice at all." "And the design? How did Harlow get it?" "I'd shown it to several companies, trying to get funding. Harlow was just getting started then. They weren't interested at first, but somehow..." Daniel shook his head. "A year later I saw my design in their showcase window. By then, Sarah needed full-time care. I couldn't fight them. I didn't have the resources." Caleb was scribbling rapidly in his notebook. "Mr. Price, this is incredible. The documentation, your first-hand account, it changes everything about the lawsuit." He looked up, his eyes bright with purpose. "Would you be willing to go on record? Let me tell your story." Daniel stared at the patent papers in his hands. For 25 years, he'd kept silent. He'd watched from the shadows as others took credit for his work, built fortunes on his ideas. He thought of Sarah's letters, of her believing in him even when he'd stopped believing in himself. "Yes," Daniel said finally. "It's time for the truth to come out." Caleb's face lit up. "I promise to handle this story with the respect it deserves. We'll need to gather more documentation, conduct formal interviews. But Mr. Price, he clasped Daniel's shoulder. This could change everything. They spent another hour in the church, Caleb taking detailed notes as Daniel shared more about the design process, the prototype development, and his interactions with Harlow. The young journalist's enthusiasm was infectious, and Daniel found himself remembering details he thought he'd forgotten. As they finally stood to leave, Caleb carefully tucked his notebook away. I'll start working on this right away. We'll need to move carefully, build an airtight case, but the truth deserves to be told. Daniel walked with Caleb to the church entrance. The evening had grown cool, and streetlights cast long shadows across the empty parking lot. Caleb turned back, one last time. Thank you for trusting me with this, Mr. Price. I won't let you down. Daniel watched as the young journalist strode purposefully toward his car, his notebook clutched tightly under his arm. The weight of decades of silence seemed to lift slightly from Daniel's shoulders as he watched Caleb drive away, determined to bring the truth to light. The next morning, Daniel pushed his cleaning cart through the lobby as usual, but something felt different. The usual buzz of morning conversation died down as he passed, replaced by whispers and pointed looks. He kept his head down, focusing on the gentle squeak of his cart's wheels against the polished floor. Is it true? A young accountant named Sarah approached him near the water cooler. Her eyes were wide with curiosity. Were you really the one who? She gestured vaguely at her wrist. Daniel's cheeks flushed. News traveled fast in the corporate world. Before he could respond, 2 more employees drifted over, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disbelief. I heard you designed the original Heritage Collection, one of them said. My father has one of those watches. He saved for months to buy it. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he gripped his mop handle. That was a long time ago, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Throughout the morning, the pattern continued. People who had never given him a second glance now stopped to stare or whisper behind their hands. Some approached with genuine interest, while others hung back, eyeing him with suspicion as if he were an imposter in janitor's clothes. In the break room, Daniel tried to eat his lunch in peace, but Marcus from legal sat down across from him uninvited. You know, my grandfather was a watchmaker too, Marcus said, unwrapping his sandwich. Nothing fancy like yours, just repairs in a little shop. But he always said there was something special about working with timepieces. He smiled warmly. I think he would have loved to meet you. These moments of kindness helped balance out the skeptics. Near the elevator, Daniel overheard 2 executives muttering about attention-seeking and ridiculous claims, but he straightened his shoulders and remembered Elena's words about standing tall in his truth. Speaking of Elena, she was practically glowing with pride every time their paths crossed. When Daniel passed the reception desk mid-morning, she beamed at him with such genuine joy that it brought a lump to his throat. I knew you had it in you, she said, reaching across her desk to squeeze his hand. It's about time people knew the real Daniel Price. During his afternoon rounds, Daniel noticed more subtle changes. The security guard, who had always been gruff, now tipped his hat respectfully. The cafeteria lady slipped him an extra cookie with a conspiratorial wink. Even the stern-faced woman from Human Resources offered a small smile when he passed her in the hallway. Not everyone was supportive, of course. A group of middle managers who often lunched with Victor gave him cold stares when he cleaned near their usual table. One of them deliberately knocked over his coffee cup, creating a mess for Daniel to clean. Oops, the manager said with fake concern. Guess that's what janitors are for, right? Even the ones with delusions of grandeur. Daniel quietly cleaned up the spill, but this time he didn't hunch his shoulders or avert his eyes. Instead, he thought of his late wife's letters and the patent papers safely stored at home. He knew who he was. As the afternoon wore on, more employees sought him out. A young intern brought him coffee. The good stuff from the executive floor, she whispered. An elderly secretary shared stories about wearing one of his original designs to her daughter's wedding. Each interaction, whether positive or negative, reminded Daniel that he could no longer hide in the shadows. Near the end of his shift, Daniel was emptying trash bins when he heard familiar footsteps. Elena appeared around the corner, practically bouncing with excitement. "Daniel, you have to come to the lobby," she said, tugging at his sleeve. "Please?" Confused but trusting, he followed her. As they approached the main entrance, he heard it, the sound of hands coming together, growing louder with each step. Rounding the corner, Daniel stopped short. Gathered in the lobby were dozens of employees, secretaries, accountants, IT workers, maintenance staff, and even a few junior executives. They were all applauding, their faces bright with genuine smiles. Someone called out, "Way to go, Mr. Price!" Another voice added, "It's about time!" Daniel stood frozen, overwhelmed by the show of support. Elena gently pushed him forward, and the applause grew louder. A security guard opened the front door with a flourish, giving Daniel a respectful nod. As he walked through the crowd toward the exit, people reached out to pat his shoulder or shake his hand. The young intern who had brought him coffee wiped away happy tears. Even Marcus from legal stood tall and proud, clapping with genuine enthusiasm. Moving through the lobby felt like walking through a dream. These were the same people who had passed him countless times without a glance, who had stepped around his wet floor signs without acknowledgement. Now they were celebrating him, recognizing the truth he had carried silently for so many years. Each step toward the door felt lighter than the last. For the first time in decades, Daniel walked out of the building, not as an invisible man but as himself, the watchmaker, the inventor, the man his wife had always believed in. The applause followed him out into the evening air, a sound he would never forget. Daniel's cheeks flushed as Sarah waited expectantly. Before he could respond, Elena appeared at his side, her familiar warm smile providing instant comfort. "It's absolutely true," Elena announced proudly, placing a supportive hand on Daniel's shoulder. "And it's about time everyone knew." Word spread through the building like wildfire. Throughout the morning, people who had barely glanced his way for years now stopped to talk. The security guard, Tom, who'd always been kind to him, came over with tears in his eyes. "I remember when you first started here," Tom said, shaking his head. "Never would have guessed. Should have known there was something special about you, though. Always so precise in everything you did." During his lunch break, Daniel sat in the corner of the cafeteria, picking at his sandwich, when Gerald Matthews from engineering approached. The older man's face was etched with recognition and regret. "Danny Price," Gerald said, pulling up a chair. "I thought that name in the paper seemed familiar. We worked together at Thomson Reed, didn't we? Back in '95? Daniel nodded, memories flooding back. "The prototype development team. You were the best of us," Gerald admitted, running a hand through his gray hair. "That design you came up with, the curved face with the innovative timing mechanism, it was revolutionary. Then you just disappeared." "My wife got sick," Daniel explained quietly. "Someone had to take care of her." Gerald's face softened. "I heard about Martha. I'm so sorry, Danny. We should have stayed in touch. Should have done something to help." More former colleagues emerged throughout the day. Patricia from marketing remembered how he'd helped her understand the technical specifications for their presentations. Michael from design recalled late nights, brainstorming over coffee and blueprints. During his afternoon rounds, Daniel's phone buzzed constantly with messages from old industry contacts. Some offered apologies, others shared memories, and a few even suggested potential opportunities. Each message sparked something inside him, a familiar excitement he hadn't felt in years. In the supply closet, Daniel found a moment of quiet to read through them all. One message particularly caught his eye, from his old mentor, Dr. Richard Chen. "Daniel, I always wondered what happened to that brilliant young engineer who could see possibilities others missed. Your design wasn't just about telling time, it was about making precision accessible to everyone. The industry needs that vision more than ever." The validation felt overwhelming. For so long, he'd pushed those dreams aside, convinced himself that chapter was closed. But now, surrounded by people who remembered his passion and skill, something stirred within him. Back in the lobby, even some of the younger employees who'd laughed at Victor's cruel joke days earlier approached with genuine interest. Sarah, the young accountant, brought him coffee and asked about his design process. The way you integrated the self-winding mechanism while maintaining accuracy, it's still studied in engineering programs," she explained, eyes bright with admiration. "My professor used it as an example of innovative thinking." During his afternoon break, Daniel sat in the small courtyard behind the building. He spread out his old sketches on the bench, looking at them with new eyes. The yellowed papers contained not just technical drawings, but dreams he'd once held, dreams of creating something meaningful. Elena found him there, still studying the designs. She sat quietly beside him, taking in the detailed drawings. "These are beautiful," she said softly. "You can see the care in every line. I used to spend hours getting each detail just right." Daniel replied, tracing a finger along a particularly intricate mechanism drawing. "Martha would bring me tea, tell me to come to bed, but I couldn't stop until it was perfect. She must have been so proud of you." "She was." Daniel smiled, remembering Martha's face when he'd shown her the first working prototype. "She always said these watches were more than just timepieces, they were art that told stories." Throughout the afternoon, more colleagues stopped by his workspace. Some brought old photos from company parties or trade shows. Others shared stories of projects they'd worked on together. Each interaction felt like another piece of himself returning, another ember of passion rekindling. Late in the day, as the office began to empty, Daniel received an email from a small watchmaking company in Switzerland. They'd read the article and recognized his name from old patent applications. Their message was simple but powerful. "Your work inspired a generation of designers. If you're ever ready to return to the industry, we'd love to talk." In the quiet of the evening, Daniel gathered his sketches and notes, handling them with renewed reverence. These weren't just remnants of a past life anymore. They were possibilities, seeds of what could still be. At his small desk in the corner of the maintenance office, he spread everything out one more time. The technical drawings, the prototype specifications, the congratulatory notes from his first successful design, each piece told part of a story he'd thought was over. His eyes fell on a particular sketch, his favorite design, the one that had eventually become the foundation for Harlow's famous watch line. The elegant curves of the case, the innovative movement mechanism, the perfect balance of form and function, it was all there, waiting to be brought to life again. Carefully gathering the papers, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not just the quiet contentment he'd learned to live with, but real, vibrant hope for the future. The kind that made his fingers itch to pick up a pencil, to start sketching new ideas. He set the sketches back on the table, the papers rustling softly in the evening quiet. Looking at them, he whispered, "Maybe it's not too late." The morning news broadcast flickered across the break room television. Daniel stood frozen, mop forgotten in his hands, as his own face appeared on screen. The reporter's voice filled the small space. "In a story that's capturing hearts across the city, a humble janitor's incredible past has come to light. Daniel Price, who has spent the last decade cleaning floors at Harlow Luxury headquarters, was actually the original inventor of their famous timepiece design." Elena appeared at his side, practically bouncing with excitement. "Daniel, look, you're on Channel 7. Other employees began filtering into the break room, their eyes darting between the television and Daniel. The usual morning chatter fell silent as everyone watched. The report showed old photographs of Daniel from his engineering days, standing proudly next to his original prototype. The images shifted to recent footage of him quietly going about his work, creating a stark contrast that made his story even more compelling. Mr. Price's journey from innovative designer to janitor wasn't a fall from grace, the reporter continued, but rather a testament to sacrificial love. When his wife became ill, he chose family over fortune, walking away from a promising career to care for her. Daniel's chest tightened as Martha's photograph appeared on screen. She was wearing one of his early prototypes, her smile radiant as always. Elena squeezed his arm gently. The story spread quickly. By lunchtime, 3 more news stations had picked up the story. Social media buzzed with shares and supportive comments. People began recognizing him on his walks to work. "You're an inspiration," a young woman told him as he waited for his bus. My father got sick last year, and I had to quit college to help care for him. Your story makes me feel like I'm not alone. Back at work, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Employees who had once ignored him now smiled warmly as he passed. Some even stopped to shake his hand or share words of encouragement. In the accounting department, a group of young professionals huddled around their computers, watching various news coverage of Daniel's story. They quickly minimized their screens when Victor Harlow strode past, but their whispered conversations continued. "Did you see how he never complained?" one intern asked another. "Just kept doing his job with dignity, even though he basically invented the watch that made this company famous. My grandmother always says true character shows in how you handle hardship," her colleague replied. "Mr. Price has more class than most of the executives here." The afternoon brought more media attention. A local magazine wanted to do a feature story about the watchmaker who chose love. A business journal requested an interview about the early days of watch design. Even a morning talk show expressed interest in having him as a guest. Elena helped him sort through the requests during her lunch break, organizing them into neat piles on her desk. "Look at this one," she said, holding up a letter. "A children's hospital wants you to speak to their young patients about never giving up on their dreams." Daniel felt overwhelmed by the attention, but Elena's steady presence helped keep him grounded. She reminded him that his story was touching people's hearts for a reason. "You're showing people that success isn't just about money or status," she explained. "It's about staying true to your values, even when it's hard." Throughout the day, more Harlow luxury employees began quietly approaching Daniel. Some shared their own stories of struggling to balance work and family. Others expressed their admiration for his choice to prioritize his wife's care over his career. In the engineering department, several young designers asked to see his original sketches during their break. They marveled at the elegant simplicity of his solutions, the innovative approaches he'd developed decades ago. "These designs were ahead of their time," one engineer commented, carefully examining the yellowed papers. "The way you solved the self-winding mechanism issue, it's brilliant." By late afternoon, even some of the company's middle managers were expressing support, though carefully out of Victor's earshot. Sarah from marketing pulled Daniel aside near the water cooler. "We've been doing it all wrong," she confided. "The company's been pushing luxury and exclusivity, but your original vision was about making quality accessible to everyone. That's what really matters." The custodial staff organized a small celebration in their break room, complete with a grocery store cake and heartfelt cards. Tom, who'd worked alongside Daniel for years, gave a touching speech about his friend's quiet dignity and kindness. As the workday drew to a close, Elena invited Daniel to watch the evening news in the reception area. They sat together, surrounded by a handful of supportive colleagues who had stayed late. The broadcast began with Daniel's story, featuring interviews with former industry colleagues who praised his innovative spirit and technical brilliance. The reporter highlighted how his decision to care for his wife, while costly in terms of career advancement, showcased the best of human nature. "In a world often driven by profit and prestige," the anchor concluded, "Daniel Price reminds us that true wealth lies in our choices, our character, and our compassion for others." Elena beamed as she watched Daniel's face on the screen. "They finally see what I've always seen in you," she said softly. Daniel sat quietly, a gentle smile playing at his lips as he watched the story of his life unfold on television. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, not just as the quiet janitor who kept the building clean, but as the man he'd always been. An inventor with a dream, a husband who chose love over ambition, and someone who had never lost his fundamental dignity. The small group in the reception area burst into applause as the segment ended. Daniel and Elena exchanged warm smiles, both feeling the surge of hope that came with this moment of vindication. The truth was finally coming to light, and with it, a sense that perhaps justice would prevail after all. Victor Harlow's leather shoes clicked against the marble floor of his penthouse office. The sunset painted orange streaks across the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, but he barely noticed the view. His fingers drummed against his desk as he watched the latest news segment about Daniel Price on his laptop. The remarkable story of Daniel Price continues to inspire. The reporter's voice rang out before Victor slammed the laptop shut. "This ends now," he growled, reaching for his phone. His hands shook as he punched in the number for his legal team. Within 30 minutes, his private conference room filled with a team of expensive lawyers in tailored suits. Their leather briefcases and tablets spread across the polished mahogany table as Victor paced at the head of the room. "I want every piece of dirt you can find on this. Janitor?" Victor spat the word like it was poison. "And if you can't find anything, make something up. I don't care what it costs." The lead attorney, Margaret Wells, adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Harlow, we need to be careful about—" "Careful?" Victor's fist slammed onto the table, making water glasses rattle. "That nobody is threatening everything I've built. Do you understand what's at stake here? Our stock has already dropped 5 points since this morning." The lawyers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Victor caught their hesitation, and his face darkened. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a checkbook. "Let me make this simple," he said, scribbling furiously. "Here's a retainer that should eliminate any ethical concerns." He slid the check across the table. The number made even the seasoned attorney's eyebrows raise. Margaret picked up the check, studying it for a moment. "We'll need to create a convincing narrative," she said slowly. "Something the public will believe." "Then do it," Victor snapped. He stalked to the wet bar and poured himself a generous glass of scotch. "Make him look desperate, pathetic, the kind of person who would do anything for attention and money." The youngest lawyer, fresh from an Ivy League school, spoke up. "We could suggest he forged the documents. Digital manipulation leaves traces. We can have experts testify that the patents show signs of tampering." Victor's eyes lit up. "Yes," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "And what about witnesses? People who can say he's been planning this scam for years." Margaret nodded, warming to the strategy. "We can find people willing to sign affidavits claiming he approached them about participating in the scheme, make it look like a long-term con." "Perfect." Victor took a long sip of scotch, savoring the burn. "I want his reputation destroyed. When we're done, no one will believe a word he says." The legal team began typing furiously on their laptops, drafting documents and strategy plans. Victor watched them work, his anger slowly transforming into cold satisfaction. "What about the media angle?" another lawyer asked. "We need to control the narrative." "I've already called in some favors with the major networks," Victor said. "They'll run whatever story we feed them. By this time tomorrow, Daniel Price will be painted as the fraud he is." The sky outside had darkened to deep purple, the city lights twinkling like stars. Victor stood at the window, watch glinting on his wrist as he contemplated his next moves. "Sir," Margaret approached with a stack of preliminary documents. "We've drafted the initial press releases and legal filings. Would you like to review them?" Victor waved her away. "Just make it happen, whatever it takes." He turned back to the group. "I want this wrapped up by the end of the week. Use whatever resources you need." The lawyers gathered their materials, sensing the dismissal in his tone. As they filed out, Victor called after them. "And make sure there's nothing that can be traced back to us. I want this to look completely legitimate." Alone in his office, Victor loosened his tie and poured another scotch. The ice clinked against the crystal tumbler as he raised it to the city lights below. "You should have stayed in your place, Daniel," he muttered. "You're about to learn what happens when you challenge someone like me." He took another slow sip, satisfaction spreading through his chest as he imagined Daniel's downfall. Everything was in motion now. The lawyers, the media, the fabricated evidence. By the time they were done, no one would remember Daniel Price as anything but a desperate fraud seeking his 15 minutes of fame. "To crushing the janitor," Victor said softly, raising his glass to his reflection in the window. "Once and for all." The morning sun filtered through the glass windows of Harlow Luxury Headquarters, but its warmth didn't reach Daniel's heart. He shuffled through the lobby, head down, trying to ignore the whispers and stares that followed him. Just yesterday, people had been patting him on the back. Today, their eyes held suspicion and doubt. Elena rushed up to him, clutching a newspaper. Her face was pinched with worry. "Daniel, have you seen this?" She held out the paper, her hands trembling slightly. The headline screamed at him, "Luxury Watch Controversy. Former Employees' Claims Questioned." Below it was a photo of him, caught at an unflattering angle while mopping the floor. Daniel's stomach churned as he scanned the article. Sources close to Harlow Luxury reveal troubling inconsistencies in Janitor's story. Evidence suggests possible forgery of documents. History of financial troubles raises questions about motivations. Daniel leaned against the reception desk, his legs suddenly weak. "But none of that is true," he whispered. "I know it's not," Elena said firmly, though her voice quivered. "We all know who you really are." But as the morning wore on, it became clear that not everyone shared Elena's faith. A group of executives walked past, their conversation deliberately loud enough for Daniel to hear. "Can you believe the nerve? Trying to steal credit for Mr. Harlow's work? Desperate people will do anything for money, I suppose." Daniel kept his head down, focusing on his work, but their words cut deep. His mop moved across the floor in mechanical strokes as more whispers floated around him. By lunchtime, his phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Social media had erupted with the story, and Victor's PR team had done their work well. Photos of Daniel's modest apartment were being shared as proof of his desperate financial situation. His years of caring for his sick wife were twisted into a narrative of poor money management. In the break room, Daniel caught sight of a TV news segment. Victor stood at a podium, perfectly composed in an expensive suit, his voice dripping with practiced concern. "It saddens me to see someone try to tarnish our company's reputation with these baseless claims," Victor was saying. "While we sympathize with Mr. Price's situation, we cannot allow false allegations to go unchallenged. We have clear documentation of our design process dating back decades." The camera cut to a wall of pristine documents and certificates, all bearing the Harlow name. Daniel's throat tightened. His own papers, yellowed with age and stored in old boxes, looked amateur in comparison. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Caleb, the journalist who had first believed in his story. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. They're threatening legal action against the paper. My editor is pulling the original article." Daniel ended the call before Caleb could finish. He couldn't bear to hear more. Throughout the afternoon, the whispers grew louder. Even some of the maintenance staff, people he'd worked alongside for years, began to distance themselves. He caught fragments of their conversations. "Makes you wonder if you really know someone. Always seems so quiet. Maybe too quiet. Probably thought he could get rich quick." Each comment felt like a physical blow. The halls he'd walked for years suddenly felt endless, the faces he passed like strangers. The weight of judgment pressed down on him until even breathing felt difficult. A group of young office workers passed by, their phones out, reading the latest online comments about him. One looked up and caught his eye, then quickly looked away, embarrassed to be seen acknowledging him. Elena tried to reach out during her lunch break, but security stopped her before she could reach his usual cleaning area. "New policy," they said, not meeting his eyes. "Restricted access to certain areas." By late afternoon, Daniel's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his mop. The same floors he'd polished to a shine for years now seemed to mock him. He caught his reflection in the gleaming marble, an old man in a janitor's uniform, trying to claim he'd created something beautiful. Victor's words from that first confrontation echoed in his mind. "You could never afford this watch." Now it seemed the whole world agreed. Who would believe a janitor could create something so magnificent? The final blow came when he overheard two security guards discussing new protocols. "Mr. Harlow wants him out by the end of the week, says we can't risk having someone so unstable around." Daniel's chest tightened. Not just his reputation, but his livelihood, the simple dignity of honest work, was being stripped away. He stumbled toward the janitor's closet, his sanctuary for so many years. The small room with its familiar smell of cleaning supplies and old coffee had been his refuge, the place where he'd kept his dreams alive through all the hard years. Now, as he closed the door behind him, the walls seemed to close in. The shelves of supplies blurred as tears filled his eyes. His legs gave way, and he slid down the wall until he hit the floor, his uniform catching on the rough surface. In this small, dark space, surrounded by mops and brooms, Daniel Price. The man who had once created beauty with his hands, who had chosen love over ambition, who had tried to reclaim his dignity, collapsed under the weight of cruel lies and calculated destruction. The only sound was his ragged breathing and the distant hum of the building's air conditioning, carrying on as if nothing had changed, as if a man's spirit hadn't just been crushed within these walls. Daniel stood in Victor's opulent office, his weathered hands clutching the formal termination notice. The paper trembled slightly as his eyes moved across the words. Immediate termination of employment. The morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to mock the darkness settling in his heart. You understand why this has to happen, don't you? Victor's voice dripped with false sympathy. He leaned back in his leather chair, absently adjusting his gold cufflinks. We can't have someone spreading lies about our company working here. It's bad for morale. Daniel's throat felt dry. They're not lies, Mr. Harlow. You know that. The court disagrees. Victor slid a newspaper across his mahogany desk. The headline glared up at Daniel. Luxury watch lawsuit dismissed. Claims deemed unfounded. Daniel's shoulders slumped as he scanned the article. Words jumped out at him. Insufficient evidence? Questionable documentation? Possible forgery? Each phrase felt like a physical blow. Security will escort you to clean out your locker, Victor said, already turning his attention to his computer screen. And Daniel? Let's not make this any more uncomfortable than it needs to be. In the hallway, Elena stood waiting, her eyes red-rimmed. Daniel, I'm so sorry. I heard what happened with the lawsuit and now this. She reached for his hand, but the security guard stepped between them. Ma'am, please step aside. Mr. Price needs to collect his belongings and exit the building. The walk to his locker felt endless. Employees peeked around corners and through doorways, whispering behind their hands. These same people had been cheering for him just days ago. Now their eyes held pity, doubt, or worst of all, judgment. His locker contained little: a change of clothes, his lunch bag, and a small framed photo of his wife. As he reached for it, his fingers brushed against the smooth surface of his original watch prototype, which he'd started carrying with him since the story broke. The weight of it in his pocket now felt like lead. The security guard stood impassively as Daniel gathered his meager belongings into a cardboard box. Elena appeared again, this time with tears flowing freely. This isn't right, she whispered fiercely. We all know you're telling the truth. Daniel managed a weak smile. Truth isn't always enough, Elena. But thank you for believing in me. The guard cleared his throat. Time to go, Mr. Price. The morning air felt cold as Daniel emerged from the building he'd faithfully maintained for years. The box in his arms contained the physical items from his job, but he felt like he was carrying the weight of his shattered dreams instead. At home, Daniel set the box down on his kitchen table. The silence of his apartment pressed in around him. His hands shook as he pulled out his wife's picture from the box. Her smile beamed up at him, forever frozen in that happier time when they were young and full of hope. He thought about how he'd walked away from his career to care for her when she got sick. That had been the right choice. He'd never regretted putting love before ambition. But this time felt different. This time he'd tried to stand up for himself, to reclaim what was rightfully his, and the world had knocked him down again. The afternoon light faded as Daniel sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by the remnants of his career, both old and new. The patent papers that had seemed so promising now lay discredited. The watch prototype that should have been his legacy now represented another failure. His wife's picture caught the last rays of sunlight, making her smile seem to glow. Daniel traced her face with his finger, remembering how she'd always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. She'd been so proud when he'd first designed that watch, had worn the prototype everywhere despite it being just a rough model. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking. I tried to make things right, to stand up for what we built together. His vision blurred as tears began to fall. But I've failed again. A tear splashed onto the glass covering her photograph. In the growing darkness of his apartment, Daniel sat in silence, the weight of his defeats, past and present, pressing down on his shoulders. The only sound was his quiet breathing, and the gentle tick of the clock on the wall, counting away the moments of another day, lost to broken dreams. Her picture smiled up at him through his tears, unchanged and unchanging, while Daniel's world crumbled around him for the second time in his life. The silence of his apartment seemed to echo with all the words he couldn't say, all the truths that wouldn't be heard, all the dreams that had slipped through his fingers once again. "I've failed again," he whispered once more into the gathering darkness, tears streaking his cheeks as the day's last light faded from the room. The rain drummed against Daniel's apartment windows, matching the heavy rhythm of his heart. He sat alone at his small kitchen table, the termination notice lying flat before him like a final verdict. The dim overhead light cast long shadows across the worn linoleum floor, and the silence felt oppressive, broken only by the steady patter of raindrops. Elena's gentle knock at his door startled him from his daze. She stood there, her work clothes slightly damp from the rain, concern etched across her kind face. "I heard what happened," she said softly. "May I come in?" Daniel nodded, stepping aside to let her enter. His apartment, though modest, was meticulously clean, a habit from years of janitorial work. Elena's eyes swept over the sparse furnishings, lingering on the framed photo of his late wife on the sideboard. "I've lost everything." "Again," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. He sank into his chair, shoulders slumped. "Maybe I should have kept quiet, stayed invisible." Elena pulled up a chair beside him. "That's not true, Daniel. You haven't lost everything." She reached across the table and picked up one of the old letters lying there, his wife's letters, which he'd been reading earlier. "You still have these, don't you?" Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the familiar handwriting. "When was the last time you really read them?" Elena asked, holding out the letter. "I mean really read them? Not just looked at them?" Daniel took the letter with trembling fingers. The paper was worn soft at the creases, yellowed with age, but carefully preserved. His wife's handwriting flowed across the page in elegant curves, each word a testament to her presence in his life. "Sarah always knew exactly what to say," he murmured, unfolding the letter carefully. "Even when things were at their worst, she could see the light." Elena smiled encouragingly. "Read it again, Daniel. Really read it." The words seemed to lift off the page as he began to read aloud. "My dearest Daniel, I know you're worried about the future. I see how you struggle with leaving your work behind to care for me. But remember this, your gifts aren't just in your hands or your designs. They're in your heart, in the way you see the world and make it better." His voice caught as he continued, "Promise me you'll never let your gifts be buried in dust. They're too precious, too important. The world needs your vision, your craftsmanship, your kindness. Even if the path ahead looks different than we planned, never stop creating, never stop believing." Rain continued to fall outside, but the sound had softened to a gentle backdrop. Daniel ran his finger along the edge of the paper, remembering Sarah's face when she'd written these words, determined, loving, wise beyond her years. "She knew me better than I knew myself," Daniel said quietly. "Even then, she could see I might try to hide away." Elena nodded. "She was right, wasn't she? About your gifts being too precious to bury?" Daniel stood up slowly, walking to the small desk in the corner where he kept his old notebooks. He pulled out the most recent one, its pages filled with watch designs he'd sketched during quiet moments at work. Some were simple, others complex, but all carried his distinctive style. Elegant functionality combined with accessible beauty. "You know what Sarah would say about all this?" Elena asked, following him to the desk. "She'd say it's not about proving Victor wrong, it's about proving yourself right." Daniel opened the notebook to a fresh page, his hand hovering over the blank paper. The rain had settled into a soft rhythm now, almost musical in its persistence. He picked up his pencil, feeling its familiar weight. "You're right," he said, straightening in his chair. "Sarah always said that creation was an act of hope." Elena squeezed his shoulder gently. "Then create, Daniel. Show the world what hope looks like." As Elena quietly let herself out, Daniel began to sketch. His pencil moved across the paper with growing confidence, drawing curves and angles that felt both familiar and fresh. The watch design taking shape under his hands was different from his old work. Simpler in some ways, more sophisticated in others. It spoke of years of observation, of understanding what people really needed in a timepiece. Hours slipped by, unnoticed. The rain eventually stopped, leaving behind a clean, quiet night. Daniel's desk lamp cast a warm circle of light as he continued working, adding details and notes to his design. Each line felt like a step forward, each calculation a small act of defiance against despair. Near midnight, he sat back and looked at what he'd created. The design was clear and purposeful, beautiful without being ostentatious. It was everything he'd always wanted to create. A watch that would serve people with dignity rather than exploit them with empty luxury. Sarah's letter lay open beside his sketchbook, her words still resonating. Never let your gifts be buried in dust. Looking at his fresh designs, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The quiet surge of creative joy, the satisfaction of bringing something new into the world. He wasn't finished, not by far, but for the first time since receiving his termination notice, he felt the flicker of hope in his chest. It was small, like a candle flame in a dark room, but it was steady and real. His hands, which had spent years cleaning floors and polishing other people's success, still remembered how to create beauty. Daniel reached for another sheet of paper, ready to refine his design further. The night was quiet now, but his mind was alive with possibilities. Each sketch was more than just lines on paper. It was a step toward reclaiming not just his legacy, but his purpose. A gentle knock at the door startled Daniel from his thoughts. Through the peephole, he saw Elena's familiar face, her arms laden with grocery bags. When he opened the door, the scent of fresh bread wafted in. "I thought you might need some supplies," Elena said, her smile warm and encouraging. She bustled past him into the kitchen, setting the bags on his counter with practiced ease. Daniel watched as she unpacked bread, fruit, and other essentials. "Elena, you didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," she interrupted firmly. "Friends look out for each other." She paused, pulling out a thermos. "And I brought your favorite coffee from that little shop near work." The simple kindness made Daniel's throat tight. He helped her put away the groceries, grateful for the distraction from his troubled thoughts. When they finished, Elena pulled out a chair at his kitchen table and sat down, gesturing for him to join her. "I've been thinking," she said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs she'd found in his cupboard, "about your wife's letters." Daniel's eyes drifted to the worn envelope on his side table. "What about them?" "You told me once that she always believed in your gifts, that she saw something in you that you sometimes couldn't see in yourself." Elena wrapped her hands around her mug. "Maybe it's time to read them again." Daniel hesitated, then retrieved the letter. The paper was soft from years of handling, his wife's neat handwriting still clear despite the aging ink. As he read the familiar words about never burying his gifts, something stirred in his chest, not the sharp pain of loss, but a warming ember of purpose. "There's something else," Elena said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a business card. "Remember Caleb, the journalist? He called me this morning. He wants to meet with you, and he's bringing someone special." Daniel took the card, studying the simple text. "Who?" "Sarah Chen," Elena said, her eyes brightening. "She's a young entrepreneur who's been making waves in ethical manufacturing. She read your story, and—" Elena leaned forward, her voice eager. "She wants to talk about starting something new." Daniel's brow furrowed. "A new what?" "A watch company," Elena replied. "But different from Harlow's. Something built on principles, not just profits." Daniel sat back, shaking his head. "After everything that's happened? Who would trust?" "People already trust you, Daniel," Elena interrupted. "That's what you don't see. Victor's smear campaign? It's backfiring. People recognize authenticity when they see it, and your story, a man who chose caring for his wife over corporate success, that resonates with people." Daniel ran his fingers over his wife's letter, remembering her words about using his gifts to help others. "When do they want to meet?" "Today, if you're willing. At that little cafe where you used to sketch designs." Elena's eyes sparkled. The one with the good pie. 2 hours later, Daniel found himself sliding into a booth at Molly's Cafe. The familiar scent of coffee and baked goods wrapped around him like an old friend. Caleb was already there, laptop open, and beside him sat a young woman with determined eyes and a ready smile. "Mr. Price." Sarah Chen stood, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting with us." As they settled in, Sarah didn't waste time with small talk. "I've been following your story," she said, pulling out a tablet. "But more importantly, I've been researching your original designs. They were revolutionary for their time, combining luxury with accessibility. That's exactly what we need now." Caleb nodded, turning his laptop to show Daniel a presentation. "We've been working on a business proposal, a watch company that brings dignity back to timepieces, making them both beautiful and affordable. The market is ready for this," Sarah added. "People are tired of status symbols that exclude. They want quality they can actually afford, products with a story they can believe in." Daniel studied the preliminary designs on Caleb's screen. They had elements of his original work, but with modern touches. "This would take significant investment," he said carefully. Sarah smiled. "That's already handled. I have backers who believe in ethical manufacturing and fair pricing. They've been waiting for the right project." She paused, meeting his eyes. "What we need is your expertise, your vision, and most importantly, your heart." Daniel sat back, memories washing over him. Late nights at his workbench, his wife bringing him coffee, the joy of creating something both beautiful and meaningful. He thought of Victor's sneering face, but instead of anger, he felt something different, determination to build something better. "I have conditions," Daniel said, straightening in his seat. "First, every watch needs to be genuinely affordable without sacrificing quality. Second, we pay our workers fairly, from factory to sales floor." He took a breath. "And third, we donate a percentage of profits to medical research, in memory of my wife." Sarah's face broke into a genuine smile. "Those aren't conditions, Mr. Price. Those are the foundation we want to build on." Caleb leaned forward. "This isn't about competing with Harlow Luxury, Daniel. It's about creating something authentic, something that honors your original vision." Daniel looked down at his wife's letter, which he'd brought with him. Her words seemed to leap off the page. "Your gifts were meant to bring light to others." He thought about all the people who, like him, deserve to own something beautiful without sacrificing their dignity to afford it. The vision began to take shape in his mind. Watches that told more than time. They told stories of integrity, craftsmanship, and respect for both makers and wearers. Not luxury for the few, but quality for many. He reached for his ever-present sketch pad and began drawing. Sarah and Caleb leaned in as flowing lines took shape, a watch face that echoed his original designs but with a modern, accessible aesthetic. His hand moved with sure strokes, muscle memory from thousands of hours at the drawing board returning naturally. "We could use recycled materials here," he said, pointing to the band design. "Make it both sustainable and cost-effective." His pencil flew across the paper. "And this mechanism, I developed it years ago. Simple but reliable. Easy to manufacture without compromising quality." Sarah was already taking notes, her excitement visible. Caleb recorded everything on his laptop, nodding with growing enthusiasm. The energy at their small table was palpable, a sense of purpose filling the air. Daniel felt it too, a familiar spark he hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't about revenge or even vindication. This was about redemption, about taking everything he'd learned and using it to create something meaningful. He looked up from his sketch, meeting Sarah and Caleb's eager faces. The weight of failure and humiliation that had pressed down on him began to lift. In its place, he felt something new growing. Hope, purpose, and the quiet certainty that his wife would have loved this. Daniel extended his hand first to Sarah, then to Caleb. "Let's build something better," he said firmly, his voice clear and strong. Their hands met in agreement, sealing a partnership built not on greed or status, but on dignity and hope. Daniel sat at his workbench in the small workshop the young innovators had set up. Warm sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, catching the metallic tools scattered across the surface. His fingers, though older now, still moved with practiced precision as he carefully assembled the final pieces of their first prototype. Around him, the team of young engineers and designers watched in reverent silence. Sarah, a bright-eyed programmer, held her breath. Mike, their marketing expert, stood with his phone ready to capture the moment. Elena had taken the afternoon off work to be there, her encouraging smile never wavering. The tiny gears clicked into place one by one. Each component had been crafted with care, not for luxury or status, but for reliability and accessibility. The watch face gleamed softly under the workshop lights. Simple, elegant, and honest. Just like Daniel had always wanted it to be. "Almost there," Daniel murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands trembled slightly as he secured the final spring. The weight of the moment pressed against his chest, making it hard to breathe. Caleb leaned forward, his reporter's notebook forgotten in his back pocket. This wasn't just a story anymore. It had become something more meaningful, something real. With steady fingers, Daniel carefully closed the case back. The steel surface bore a simple inscription: "Price timepieces, crafted with dignity." Below it, his signature had been expertly engraved. Not as a boast, but as a promise. "Would you like to do the honors?" Sarah asked, holding out the winding crown they had designed together. It was different from the ornate ones Victor's company used. More practical, more accessible, but no less beautiful. Daniel took it with trembling fingers. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The crown fit perfectly, just as they had planned. He turned it slowly, feeling the familiar resistance of quality craftsmanship. Tick, tick, tick. The sound filled the workshop. Clean, precise, steady, like a heartbeat. Everyone held their breath. Daniel checked the time against the atomic clock on the wall. Perfect synchronization. "It works," Mike whispered, then louder. "It works." The room erupted in cheers. Sarah hugged Daniel, tears streaming down her face. The young engineers high-fived each other, their excitement bouncing off the walls. Elena wiped her eyes, beaming with pride. Daniel couldn't move. He stared at the watch face, memories washing over him like waves. He remembered late nights at his old workbench, his wife bringing him coffee, her gentle encouragement when he doubted himself. He thought of all the sketches in his worn notebook, all the dreams he'd tucked away when life had other plans. "Daniel?" Elena's soft voice broke through his reverie. "Are you okay?" He nodded, unable to speak. The watch felt alive in his hands, not just a timepiece, but a testament to perseverance, to dignity, to love. Sarah stepped forward with a leather strap they had chosen together. Simple, durable, comfortable. "We thought you should have the very first one," she said softly. Daniel's fingers brushed over the leather, feeling its quality. Not the exotic materials Victor used to flaunt wealth, but honest leather that would age beautifully with time and care. "The whole first batch is already pre-sold," Mike announced proudly. "People believe in what we're doing here, Daniel. They believe in you." Caleb had given up any pretense of journalistic detachment and was grinning from ear to ear. "This is more than just a watch," he said. "It's a statement about what really matters." Daniel nodded again, understanding. This watch wasn't about proving Victor wrong or seeking revenge. It was about proving something to himself. That dignity and compassion could triumph over greed, that dreams delayed weren't dreams denied. With careful movements, he attached the leather strap to the case. The click, as it secured into place, seemed to echo through the workshop. Elena stepped closer, touching his shoulder gently. "She would be so proud of you," she whispered. Daniel's vision blurred with tears. He remembered his wife's words in her letters. "Never let your gifts be buried in dust." She had always believed in him, even when he stopped believing in himself. The workshop fell silent as Daniel raised the watch. Sunlight caught the crystal, making it shine. His hands shook slightly as he opened the strap. This moment felt holy somehow, like a communion between past and present, between loss and renewal, between what was taken and what was finally reclaimed. The leather felt warm against his skin as he wrapped it around his wrist. The buckle slipped easily into place, securing it perfectly. The weight felt right, not heavy with luxury, but substantial with purpose. Daniel looked at his creation ticking steadily on his wrist. Tears rolled down his cheeks freely now, but he didn't try to hide them. These were tears of healing, of completion, of coming home. "This one's for you, my love," he whispered, touching the watch face gently. The steady ticking filled the silence, marking not just time but a new beginning. Daniel sat at his workbench in the small workshop, surrounded by the gentle whirring of machinery and the focused energy of his young team. The space, though modest, buzzed with purpose. Scattered blueprints covered the walls, and the scent of coffee mingled with machine oil in the air. Elena burst through the door, her tablet clutched to her chest. "Daniel, you need to see this!" Her voice trembled with excitement as she rushed to his side. "The orders, they're coming in faster than we can count them." Daniel's hands stilled over the prototype he'd been adjusting. He wiped them carefully on his work apron and accepted the tablet from Elena. The numbers on the screen made his breath catch. Hundreds of orders had poured in overnight, and more were appearing even as he watched. "It's the article," Caleb wrote. One of the young engineers, Marcus, called from his computer station. "People love the story, but more than that, they love what we stand for. Affordable quality, dignity for everyone." The workshop's small television hummed in the corner, where a local news anchor was covering their story. In a remarkable turn of events, former watch designer Daniel Price has launched a revolutionary new timepiece brand. Unlike luxury competitors, these watches combine premium craftsmanship with accessible pricing. Sarah, their marketing lead, rushed in with her phone displaying their social media feeds. "We're trending! People are sharing their stories about saving up for years to afford a good watch. They're thanking us for making quality accessible. Some are even posting about canceling their Harlow pre-orders to support us instead." Daniel's eyes moved from screen to screen, taking in the overwhelming response. His vision blurred slightly as he remembered late nights with his wife, discussing his dreams of creating watches that would make people feel proud, regardless of their means. "This was always the point," he said softly. "A good watch shouldn't just be for the wealthy." The phone lines kept ringing. Their small customer service team, set up in the corner of the workshop, worked tirelessly to handle the volume of calls. "Another bulk order from a department store chain," called out Tom, their sales manager. "They want to feature us in their holiday collection." Marcus pulled up their inventory tracking system. "We'll need to scale up production faster than we planned. The current stock won't last the week at this rate." He looked worried, but excited. The small batch approach isn't going to cut it anymore. "I know some former colleagues," Daniel said, standing up from his workbench. "Good people, excellent craftsmen. They've been looking for meaningful work. Let me make some calls." Throughout the morning, the energy in the workshop continued to build. Local coffee shops sent over free beverages, having heard about their overnight success. Community members stopped by with congratulatory cards and small gifts. Some even shared stories about family watches they'd treasured for generations, understanding the significance of what Daniel and his team were creating. Elena set up a small bulletin board where she started pinning customer messages. "Listen to this one," she said, reading from a new email. "My father worked as a janitor for 40 years. He always wanted a good watch but could never justify the expense. I just ordered one of yours for his retirement next month. Thank you for making his dream possible." Daniel had to sit down, overwhelmed by the impact their work was having. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his wife's photograph on his workbench. The frame was worn from years of handling, but her smile remained as bright as ever. The workshop door opened again, and Caleb entered with his notebook in hand. "I hope you don't mind another visit," he said, grinning. "The story's gone national. People are calling you the People's Watchmaker." Sarah pulled up their online store analytics. "We've had orders from every state now," she announced, "and messages of support from watchmakers and craftsmen around the world. They're saying we're changing the industry conversation." Daniel walked slowly around the workshop, watching his team work. Marcus and the engineers were scaling up production plans. Sarah and her team were responding to media requests. The customer service team was sharing stories and taking orders. Everyone moved with purpose, driven by something bigger than profit. A small chime from Elena's tablet drew everyone's attention. "Another milestone," she said, her voice thick with emotion. 10,000 orders, in just one day. The workshop fell silent. Daniel stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the dreams he'd carried for decades finally coming to life. He thought of all the nights he'd spent cleaning floors, holding onto his sketches and his hope. He thought of his wife's unwavering belief in him, her insistence that his gifts weren't meant to be buried. The tears came then, quiet and dignified, rolling down his cheeks as he watched the order numbers continue to climb. His team gathered around him, offering silent support and sharing in the moment's weight. "Thank you," he managed to say, looking at each face in turn. "Thank you for believing in this dream." Elena stepped forward and squeezed his hand. "No, Daniel. Thank you for showing us that dignity and compassion can change the world." On the workbench behind them, the prototype watches continued their steady rhythm, marking time in a world where, finally, quality and accessibility stood together. Daniel watched the order count rise higher, each number representing not just a sale, but a story, a dream made accessible, a small piece of dignity restored. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Harlow Luxury's executive floor as Victor Harlow paced in his office, his expensive shoes wearing a path in the plush carpet. His secretary had just delivered the latest sales reports, and the numbers made his stomach churn. "This can't be right," he muttered, shuffling through the papers for the third time. The graphs all pointed downward, showing a steep decline in luxury watch sales over the past month. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, punching in the number for his chief financial officer. "Harrison, get up here now," he barked into the phone. Within minutes, Harrison appeared at the door, clutching his tablet and looking nervous. "Sir, I can explain." "Explain what?" Victor snapped, waving the reports in the air. "How our quarterly projections are down 40%? How that Janitor's cheap knockoffs are eating into our market share?" Harrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Harlow, it's not just the competition. Our major investors are concerned." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "3 of them called this morning. They're pulling out." Victor's face reddened. "Pulling out? They can't do that. We're Harlow Luxury. We're the pinnacle of sophistication." "Sir, the media coverage about Daniel Price's story has affected public perception. People are questioning our brand's authenticity and his new watches." Harrison hesitated. "They're getting exceptional reviews. The quality-to-price ratio is unprecedented." Victor stormed to his wall of windows, glaring down at the city below. Somewhere out there, that janitor was actually succeeding at undermining everything he'd built. He could almost hear his father's voice. "Image is everything, son. Once you lose that, you lose it all." His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Harlow? The board members are waiting in the conference room." Victor straightened his tie, trying to compose himself. But as he strode down the hallway, he couldn't ignore the whispers that followed him. His employees, once eager to please, now averted their eyes. Some had even jumped ship to join Price's venture. The board meeting was brutal. Elderly men in expensive suits spoke of rebranding opportunities and damage control. One suggested a complete corporate restructuring. Another recommended reaching out to Daniel Price for a potential collaboration. "Collaborate?" Victor exploded, jumping to his feet. "With a janitor? Have you all lost your minds?" "Mr. Harlow," the board chairman said firmly, "Daniel Price is no longer just a janitor. His company's pre-orders have exceeded all projections. Their waiting list is 3 months long. Meanwhile, our stocks have dropped 15% this week alone." Back in his office, Victor's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists wanted statements. Retailers were calling to reduce their orders. Even his country club friends were distancing themselves, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. He jabbed at his computer keyboard, pulling up news articles. There was Daniel Price, looking dignified in a simple suit, speaking about making quality timepieces accessible to everyone. The comments section overflowed with support. "Finally, someone thinking about the average person. This is what integrity looks like. Goodbye, Harlow Luxury." Victor's assistant knocked timidly. "Sir, the marketing team needs your approval on the new campaign." "Get out," he roared, causing her to jump. "All of you, just get out!" Left alone, he poured himself a generous glass of scotch, his hands shaking so badly he spilled some on his desk. The crystal decanter had been a gift from a Chinese investor, one who had called that morning to terminate their partnership. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his lawyer, informing him that several former employees had come forward with allegations of corporate misconduct. The SEC was opening an investigation. Victor loosened his tie, feeling the walls closing in. The empire he'd inherited, the one he'd expanded through manipulation and deceit, was slipping through his fingers. And it wasn't just about the money, it was about his identity. Who was Victor Harlow without his wealth, without his power? He pulled up the company's stock ticker, watching in horror as the numbers continued to fall. Another news alert popped up. Daniel Price announces partnership with major European distributor. The article showed Daniel shaking hands with one of Victor's former biggest clients. His phone rang again, his ex-wife's lawyer, demanding the alimony payment he was late on. Then another call, his Ferrari dealer, about the check that had bounced. Then his realtor, saying the potential buyers for his Hampton estate had backed out after hearing about the company's troubles. Victor's carefully constructed world was unraveling thread by thread. He thought of all the people he'd stepped on to get to the top, the employees he'd belittled, the competitors he'd crushed, the janitor he'd mocked. Now they were all watching him fall. He stumbled to his private bar, reaching for the crystal glass that had been his father's, the same glass he'd used to celebrate every corporate takeover, every successful manipulation, every crushing of a competitor. The final blow came in an email from his board chairman. "Emergency meeting tomorrow. Vote of no confidence. Recommendation for immediate leadership change." Victor stared at the screen, his vision blurring. Everything he'd ever valued, status, power, superiority, was dissolving before his eyes. The carefully maintained facade of success cracked, revealing the hollow man beneath. With a roar of fury, he hurled his crystal glass against the wall. It shattered spectacularly, sending shards of crystal and drops of scotch flying across his pristine office. The sound echoed through the empty executive floor, a perfect symphony to accompany the death of his empire. He stood there, breathing heavily, watching the expensive liquor drip down his imported wallpaper. Below the broken glass lay a newspaper, its headline clearly visible, "Price Watches, a Story of Redemption." Next to it, his own company's stock ticker continued its relentless descent into oblivion. Daniel stood at the podium, his heart beating steadily as he gazed out at the faces before him. The community center was packed with people from all walks of life. Young innovators wearing his affordable watches, former colleagues who had reconnected with him, and even some of his old church members who had supported him through the darkest times. The warm lighting cast a gentle glow across the wooden stage as Daniel adjusted the microphone. He wore a simple blue suit, nothing fancy but dignified. And on his wrist gleamed one of his new watches, its face catching the light. Elena sat in the front row, her eyes bright with encouragement, just as they had been that first day when she'd believed in his story. "Thank you all for coming today," Daniel began, his voice clear and humble. "You know, when I started this journey, I was cleaning floors and hiding who I really was." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But something my late wife wrote to me years ago kept tugging at my heart. She said never to bury my gifts." A gentle murmur rippled through the audience. Daniel smiled, touching the watch on his wrist. "This watch isn't just about telling time, it's about telling truth, about remembering who we are, even when the world tries to make us forget." He took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the room. "I could have chosen bitterness when things got hard, could have let anger eat away at me when others tried to destroy my reputation. But my wife taught me something else too, that true wealth isn't in what we own, but in how we live." Daniel's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Faith kept me going when I wanted to give up. Not just faith in God, but faith in goodness, in the power of truth to eventually shine through. Every morning when I walked into that building as a janitor, I chose to work with dignity. Every floor I polished, I did it with pride, because no honest work is beneath any of us." Some people in the audience nodded, others wiped away tears. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out one of his wife's old letters, carefully unfolding it. My wife wrote, "Your hands were made to create beauty, Daniel. Don't let fear stop you from sharing your gifts with the world." He carefully refolded the letter, his voice growing soft with emotion. Compassion matters more than competition. When we launched this new watch company, we didn't do it to get revenge or to make millions. We did it to prove that everyone deserves quality. Everyone deserves respect. A young engineer in the audience, one of his new partners, smiled and touched his own watch, pride evident in his expression. "These watches," Daniel continued, gesturing to his wrist, "they're not status symbols. They're reminders that we all have value. That time is precious, and how we spend it matters more than how much money we spend on measuring it." The room had grown perfectly still, hanging on his every word. Even the usual shuffling of feet and clearing of throats had ceased. "I lost everything twice in my life," Daniel admitted, his voice carrying clearly through the silence. "First when illness took my wife, and then when others tried to take my dignity. But each time, faith showed me a different path. Not up toward wealth and power, but forward toward purpose." He straightened his shoulders, speaking with quiet conviction. "Never give up on your gifts. They're not given to us by accident. Whether you're sweeping floors or running companies, your work matters, your truth matters, and most importantly, how you treat others matters." Daniel's eyes met Elena's in the front row, and he smiled warmly. "Sometimes it takes just one person believing in you to help you believe in yourself again. Sometimes the kindness of a friend can rewrite your whole story." Tears glistened in several eyes throughout the audience. An elderly man in the back dabbed at his face with a handkerchief. "I stand here today not as a victim who overcame, but as a witness to the power of faith, compassion, and perseverance. These aren't just nice words. They're the foundation of everything meaningful we build in this life." Daniel touched his watch one final time. "Every tick of this watch reminds me that we all have the same 24 hours each day. What matters isn't how expensive the watch is that counts them, but how we use those hours to lift each other up, to create beauty, to share our gifts." The audience began to rise, first a few people, then entire rows, until everyone was standing. The applause started softly, then built to a thunderous roar. Some people were crying openly now, others nodding vigorously in agreement. Daniel stood quietly at the podium, humbled by the response. He saw faces of people who had been touched by his story, who found hope in his journey. The applause continued, washing over him like a wave of affirmation. As the crowd continued their standing ovation, Elena made her way to the stage. Her eyes shone with pride and something deeper, a knowing that she had seen this potential in him all along, even when he was just the quiet janitor with a secret past. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "You've become who you were always meant to be," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the continuing applause. Daniel squeezed her hand back, grateful for the friend who had helped him rediscover his courage. The applause echoed through the community center, a testament to the power of a story about faith, compassion, and never giving up on one's gifts. Daniel walked through the bright, airy workshop space, so different from the cramped janitor's closet where he'd spent countless hours. Sunlight streamed through large windows, catching the metallic glint of watch parts arranged neatly on wooden workbenches. The gentle ticking of dozens of timepieces filled the air with a soothing rhythm. "Mr. Price?" a familiar voice called out. Daniel turned to see Marcus, who had worked alongside him as a janitor at Harlow Luxury for 5 years. The younger man stood nervously in the doorway, his worn work uniform replaced by clean, casual clothes. "Please, just Daniel," he smiled warmly, extending his hand. "It's good to see you, Marcus." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "I heard you were hiring, after what happened at Harlow." He trailed off, looking down at his feet. "They let you go too?" Daniel's heart ached, remembering how Victor had started firing anyone who had shown him support. Marcus nodded. "Most of the cleaning staff said it was budget cuts, but we knew better." Daniel placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "How would you like to learn watchmaking? Real craftsmanship, not just cleaning up after others?" Marcus's eyes widened. "Me? But I don't know anything about watches." Neither did I, once upon a time, Daniel chuckled. Someone taught me. Now it's my turn to teach others. Over the next few hours, Daniel showed Marcus the basics of handling the delicate tools and components. He explained each step patiently, the way he wished someone had taught him when he was starting out. Marcus's hands trembled at first, but gradually grew steadier as Daniel encouraged him. "You're doing great," Daniel assured him. "Remember, every master watchmaker started exactly where you are now." Word spread quickly among the former janitorial staff. By week's end, Sarah, who had always smiled at Daniel in the hallways, came seeking work. Then came Jorge, who had shared his lunch breaks with Daniel for years. Each time, Daniel welcomed them with open arms and genuine respect. "The workbenches are adjustable," he explained to Sarah, who had struggled with back pain from years of bending over mops. "We believe in making the work comfortable for the person, not the other way around." Jorge, who had always been quiet, revealed a natural talent for the precise work. "You have amazing attention to detail," Daniel praised, watching him carefully align tiny gears. "That's something that can't be taught." The workshop slowly transformed into a bustling community. Daniel made sure there were comfortable break areas with good coffee and healthy snacks. He remembered too well the cramped break room at Harlow, with its flickering fluorescent lights and broken vending machine. "Take the time you need," he told his team when they needed breaks. "Quality work comes from rested hands and clear minds." One morning Elena visited the workshop, her eyes bright with tears, as she watched the former cleaning staff working with dignity at their benches. "This is beautiful, Daniel," she whispered. "You've given them more than just jobs." Daniel nodded, watching Marcus patiently teach a newer employee the proper way to use a loop. "They always had the potential. They just needed someone to believe in them, like you believed in me." The atmosphere in the workshop was different from any workplace Daniel had known. People smiled genuinely, helped each other willingly, and took pride in their work. There was laughter during lunch breaks, shared stories of family, and celebrations of small victories when someone mastered a new skill. "My daughter couldn't believe it when I told her I'm making watches now," Sarah shared during a coffee break, beaming with pride. She told all her friends at school. Jorge, who had been silent for so long, began teaching others Spanish phrases during lunch. The workshop soon filled with cheerful greetings in 2 languages, breaking down old barriers that had kept people apart at their previous workplace. Daniel made sure everyone understood the philosophy behind their work. "We're not just making watches," he explained during a team meeting. "We're creating something that helps people value their time, and we're doing it with respect for both the craft and each other." As the sun began to set that evening, Daniel walked through the workshop one last time before closing. Marcus was carefully cleaning his workstation while Sarah organized tomorrow's materials. Jorge was showing a newer employee how to properly store the delicate tools. The sight filled Daniel's heart with warmth. These weren't just employees, they had become family. Each person had found their place, their dignity, their worth. The gentle ticking of watches filled the air like 100 tiny heartbeats, keeping time for their shared dreams. Daniel reached for the light switch, pausing to take in the scene. The workshop glowed with the last rays of sunlight, casting long shadows across the workbenches where his team, his family, were finishing their day. Each face showed contentment, pride, and belonging. A smile spread across his face as he watched them gather their things, calling out cheerful good nights to each other. This was more than he had ever dreamed possible, not just success, but the creation of a true community where everyone was valued. Victor Harlow's polished shoes clicked against the sidewalk as he trudged through downtown, his shoulders hunched beneath his now ill-fitting designer suit. The morning sun felt harsh on his face, mocking his diminished status. He paused at a busy intersection, his eyes drawn unwillingly to a billboard looming overhead. There it was again, another advertisement for Price watches. The simple yet elegant timepiece displayed in the image seemed to mock him, its tagline reading, "Time for Everyone," in clean, dignified letters. Victor's jaw clenched. These advertisements had become impossible to avoid, plastered across bus stops, magazines, and social media. A group of office workers walked past, all wearing the distinctive watches with their brass-colored cases and cream-colored faces. Victor recognized them as the Community Collection, Daniel's most popular line, priced so that almost anyone could afford them. His hand unconsciously moved to his own bare wrist, where his limited edition watch used to rest before he'd been forced to sell it. Inside a nearby electronics store, television screens in the window display showed a news segment about price watches. Victor found himself moving closer, drawn like a moth to flame. Daniel's face filled the screens, not the downtrodden janitor Victor remembered, but a man transformed. He spoke with quiet confidence about his company's mission to bring quality craftsmanship to everyone. "Our watches aren't status symbols," Daniel was saying, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "They're instruments of dignity. Everyone deserves to own something beautiful, something well made." The words struck Victor like physical blows. He remembered his own speeches, full of exclusivity and prestige, designed to make people feel lesser if they couldn't afford his products. The contrast made his chest tight. Walking on, he passed a coffee shop where two teenagers excitedly compared their price watches. "My dad got us matching ones," one said proudly. "He said it's the first time he could afford to buy us both something really nice." Victor's steps faltered. He'd never considered the impact of making luxury accessible. In his world, exclusivity had been everything. But watching these kids beam with pride over their watches, he felt an unfamiliar sensation, shame mixed with understanding. A newspaper stand caught his eye. The business section showed two contrasting headlines. "Price Watches Expands to Meet Demand," alongside "Harlow Luxury Continues Downward Spiral." Victor picked up the paper with trembling hands, scanning the articles. While his company drowned in scandal and debt, Daniel's enterprise thrived through transparency and fair practices. The memory of their last interaction played in his mind: his cruel dismissal of Daniel, the fabricated evidence, the smear campaign. Yet Daniel had never retaliated with bitterness. He'd simply built something better, something that served others rather than exploited them. A delivery truck rumbled past, its side emblazoned with the Price Watches logo. Below it, the company's motto read, "Crafted with care, created for all." Victor remembered mocking those words when they first appeared, calling them naive and beneath the industry's standards. Now they seemed to represent everything his own company had lacked: sincerity, purpose, humanity. The morning crowd thickened as Victor approached the business district. More and more Price watches caught the sunlight on people's wrists: teachers, construction workers, business professionals, all wearing the same designs with equal pride. There was no distinction, no hierarchy, just simple appreciation for well-made timepieces. His own words from years ago echoed back to him. You could never afford this watch. He'd wielded exclusivity like a weapon, never considering that true success might lie in inclusion. The burning envy in his chest began to shift, making room for something new, the first tender shoots of humility. Rounding a corner, Victor stopped short. Across the street, a small crowd had gathered outside the Price Watches workshop. Daniel stood among them, dressed simply but radiantly happy as he chatted with customers and employees alike. Some were former Harlow luxury workers, Victor realized with a start. They looked more content now than they ever had under his leadership. Daniel's new watch gleamed on his wrist, not a gaudy show of wealth but a simple statement of craftsmanship and authenticity. He was surrounded by people who genuinely respected him, not out of fear or obligation, but because of who he was and what he stood for. The sight struck Victor to his core. This was true success, not the cold marble lobbies or exclusive showrooms he'd built, but the warm community Daniel had created. The man he'd once dismissed as just a janitor had built something far more valuable than Victor's empire of pride. Victor stood rooted to the spot, watching as Daniel shared a laugh with his supporters. The morning sun caught the brass cases of their watches, creating a gentle glow that seemed to illuminate more than just timepieces. It highlighted the connections between people, the dignity of honest work, the power of humble service. His own reflection in a nearby window showed a changed man, shoulders slumped, designer suit wrinkled, the trappings of luxury stripped away to reveal the truth beneath. The envy still burned, but now it was tempered by something else. the first real stirrings of humility, and with it, the faintest glimmer of hope for his own redemption. Victor Harlow's polished shoes clicked against the sidewalk as he trudged through downtown, his shoulders hunched beneath his now ill-fitting designer suit. The morning sun felt harsh on his face, highlighting every new wrinkle of worry that had formed over the past few weeks. Shop windows that once displayed his luxury watches now showcased Daniel Price's creations instead. His stomach churned at the sight of another billboard featuring Daniel's warm smile and the tagline, "Watches for Everyone." The advertisement towered over the street, a constant reminder of his downfall. Victor's hand instinctively went to his bare wrist. He'd sold his own watch collection to pay legal fees. "Look how far I've fallen," he muttered, passing a newsstand where headlines still discussed the corruption scandal that had brought down Harlow luxury. The sight of his own face in the papers, looking haggard and defensive as he left the courthouse, made him wince. A group of business people walked past, their conversations hushed as they recognized him. Victor caught fragments of their whispers. "That's him. The one who stole. Can you believe?" He quickened his pace, his face burning with shame. The fancy restaurants where he'd once held court now seemed to mock him with their gleaming windows. Through one, he spotted several executives wearing Daniel's watches, the simple but elegant designs catching the light. His own watch designs, or rather, the ones he'd claimed as his own, had been all about flash and status. Now they seemed gaudy in comparison. "I never thought I'd fall this low," Victor muttered bitterly, stopping to stare at his reflection in a store window. His tie hung slightly crooked, his hair less perfectly styled than before. The arrogant gleam that once dominated his expression had dimmed to a dull resignation. The sound of cheerful voices drew his attention across the street. There, emerging from a small cafe, stood Daniel Price surrounded by a group of young designers and workers. They carried coffee cups bearing the cafe's logo, the same cafe that had once refused Victor entry for being too common. Now Daniel was welcomed there as a beloved regular. Victor's first instinct was to duck away, to avoid the humiliation of being seen. But something kept him rooted to the spot. Perhaps it was the genuine warmth radiating from the group, so different from the false flattery he'd surrounded himself with. Or maybe it was the way Daniel carried himself, now confident but not arrogant, successful but still humble. The group dispersed, leaving Daniel standing alone on the corner. He wore one of his own watches, its face catching the sunlight. Unlike Victor's gaudy timepieces, this one was elegant in its simplicity, designed to serve rather than to show off. Their eyes met across the street. Victor felt his chest tighten with a mixture of shame and resentment. He expected to see triumph or mockery in Daniel's expression, the same cruel satisfaction he himself would have shown in reversed circumstances. Instead, he saw something that stopped him cold: compassion. Daniel's face showed no trace of gloating or revenge. His eyes held only understanding and a gentle sadness. It was the look of someone who knew what it meant to fall, to lose everything, but also knew the path back up. The traffic light changed, and Daniel crossed the street toward him. Victor stood frozen, his usual sharp tongue silenced by the genuine concern in the other man's approach. Here was the man he'd mocked, whose invention he'd stolen, whose job he'd taken away, and yet Daniel walked toward him not as an enemy, but as a fellow human being. "Mr. Harlow," Daniel said softly, stopping a few feet away. His voice carried no trace of condemnation. Victor wanted to sneer, to maintain his last shred of superiority, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of his actions, his pride, his cruelty, it all seemed to crash down at once. His shoulders slumped further. Daniel took another step forward. The watch on his wrist, his own creation, bearing his own name, caught the light again. But unlike Victor's old timepieces, it wasn't meant to flaunt wealth or status. It represented something far more valuable: redemption, dignity, and the triumph of character over circumstances. I've lost everything," Victor found himself admitting, his voice cracking. The words surprised him. He hadn't meant to speak them aloud. Daniel's response was to extend his hand, steady and sure. "Forgiveness is the only watch worth keeping time with," he said simply. Victor stood speechless, staring at the offered hand. In that moment, all his expensive watches, all his status symbols, All his carefully cultivated superiority meant nothing compared to this simple gesture of grace. The community center buzzed with life on a bright Saturday afternoon. Streamers in blue and silver, the colors of Daniel's new watch brand, decorated the walls, and tables laden with cake and punch lined the perimeter. Children darted between clusters of adults, their small wrists adorned with kid-sized versions of Daniel's watches, their faces bright with joy. Elena stood by the entrance, greeting guests with her signature warm smile. She wore a simple dress and one of Daniel's classic designs on her wrist, a gift he'd insisted on giving to the person who'd believed in him from the start. Beside her, Caleb chatted animatedly with some of the young innovators who'd helped launch the company, his notebook tucked away for once as he simply enjoyed the celebration. Daniel moved through the crowd, stopping often to shake hands or accept hugs. His eyes crinkled with genuine pleasure at each interaction. Gone was the hesitant janitor who'd once hidden in the shadows. In his place stood a man comfortable in his own skin, wearing a modest suit that spoke of success without ostentation. "Mr. Price! Mr. Price!" A group of children surrounded him, eagerly showing off their watches. "Look, mine glows in the dark," one little girl exclaimed, cupping her hands around her wrist. Daniel knelt down to their level, examining each watch with exaggerated care. "Those look perfect on you," he said softly. "You know what's special about these watches? They're not just for telling time, they're for remembering that everyone deserves something beautiful in their life." The children nodded solemnly before racing off again, their laughter echoing through the hall. Daniel watched them go, his heart full. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile, seeing joy spread without discrimination, without the barriers of wealth or status. The room gradually quieted as Elena tapped a glass with a spoon. "Everyone, if I could have your attention, Mr. Price would like to say a few words." Daniel made his way to the small podium, adjusting the microphone. His hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness anymore, but from emotion. He looked out at the faces before him, his dedicated team members, many former janitorial colleagues who now worked with dignity in his company, community supporters who'd stood by him, and families who'd embraced his vision of accessible quality. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady and warm, "I was polishing floors and hiding who I really was. I thought my dreams were buried with my past." He paused, touching the watch on his wrist, the first one he'd produced under his own name. But life has a way of teaching us that it's never too late for redemption. The room hung on his words, Elena dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, while Caleb leaned forward, his journalist's instincts still catching every detail of this moment. "This celebration isn't about watches," Daniel continued. "It's about dignity. It's about remembering that every person deserves respect, regardless of their job title or bank account." His voice grew stronger. "When I was a janitor, some people looked right through me. Others, like Elena here," he gestured to her with a grateful smile, "saw me as a person first. That's the difference compassion makes." Several of his former custodial colleagues nodded, understanding written across their faces. They now worked in various roles throughout his company, from quality control to customer service, each position designed to utilize their unique strengths. "We've built something special together," Daniel said, looking at his team. "Not just a company, but a community. Every watch we make carries a piece of that spirit, the belief that luxury isn't about exclusion, but about making beauty accessible to everyone." He glanced down at his notes but decided to speak from his heart instead. "Some people thought I was crazy to price our watches so affordably. They said we'd never make it." A knowing chuckle rippled through the crowd. "But true success isn't measured in profit margins. It's measured in the smile of a child wearing their first real watch, in the dignity of workers who know they're valued, in the knowledge that we're doing business with compassion." The room burst into applause, but Daniel raised his hand for one final thought. "My wife," his voice caught slightly, "she always told me never to bury my gifts. She believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. Everything we've built here, every watch we've made, carries her spirit of kindness and her belief that everyone deserves a chance to shine." More applause filled the room, and this time Daniel stepped back from the podium, accepting the embrace of Elena and the hearty handshake of Caleb. Around him, children continued to play, their watched wrists catching the light as they moved. Parents gathered in groups, comparing their own Daniel Price watches with pride rather than pretension. His team members mingled with guests, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of being part of something meaningful. Daniel found a quiet moment to himself near the window. Sunlight streamed in, catching the face of his watch, the one he'd dedicated to his wife's memory. He ran his finger over its smooth surface, remembering her gentle encouragement, her unwavering faith in him. "Thank you," he whispered, touching the watch face gently. A peaceful smile settled on his features as he watched the celebration continue around him. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel Price, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.